Okay.
Test. Oh, there we go. Thank you. All right. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call to order a special meeting of the Healdsburg City Council for May 11th, 2026. Can we have a roll call vote, please? Or roll call, please.
Councilmember Higley.
Here.
Councilmember Kelly.
Here.
Councilmember Mitchell.
Here.
Vice Mayor Edwards.
Here.
Mayor Herod.
Here. We all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So, before we approve the agenda, I'm planning to do public comment at the beginning and at the very end of the meeting. And also just want to mention, depending on where we're at, that I'll probably call short break in about an hour and a half or something like that, just to mention that in case. I don't want it to feel like too much of an interruption since it's just one item, but I think it might do us all well if we have a quick break somewhere in the middle there. So can I have a motion to approve the agenda, please?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Higley.
Yes.
Councilmember Kelly.
Yes.
Councilmember Mitchell.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Edwards.
Yes.
Mayor Herod.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to open it up for public comment now. This time is set aside to receive comments from the public on any item of interest to the public within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council other than scheduled agenda items. Pursuant to the Brown Act, however, the City Council cannot consider any issues or take action on any request during this comment period. Do we have anybody for public comment? Okay, there's nobody here. We'll close public comment and we'll go on to our business item, fiscal year budget workshop with Finance Director Katie Edgar.
And Mayor and Council, while Director Edgar is pulling up the PowerPoint, I wanted to make just a couple of comments to kick us off for the evening. As you know, this is a one-topic special meeting on our budget development process. So this will be a lot of budget tonight. You're also aware you've got what might be the longest PowerPoint that we've delivered in this chamber. 100 and a few slides of budget. So it's a lot. And we recognize that, and we're going to try to break it up into meaningful chunks. I also expect that just about everything you see will be familiar. These are all projects and programs and challenges and opportunities that we've talked about a lot over months and years. So hopefully that helps with the magnitude of information coming. But I just wanted to try to frame this a little bit. What you have, this is really, we've been doing budget work at our, maybe not the last meeting, the meeting before that, we spent quite a bit of time talking about the Community Services Fund and capital improvement. The City Council goal setting included a financial update that led into this. We've talked about community engagement. And with all of that said, this is really kind of, as far as I'm concerned, the most significant and impactful part of the budget development process. What you have before you at this point is really the entirety of a budget. This is when staff takes all of our direction. And as you all know, all of the operations and things that just kind of roll from budget to budget, and we update the costs and we update the revenues and roll it all into one package. That's what you have in front of you tonight. And from our standpoint, it's a budget that doesn't do everything we'd like, because none of them do, but works. It matches our resources and our needs, and keeps the essential operations of the city moving. And as best as we can tell, is reflective of the staff, the council direction that we've heard over the past weeks and months. That certainly, though, doesn't mean we're done. This is the most important time for the council to be able to look at that. And we're going to do our best to say, here's where we made an assumption or made a recommendation, but in many cases, that's just one option of many. And there could be a number of places where the council wants us to do some more work or wants us to make some changes. And that's very much the intent of this meeting tonight. There's most definitely time to do that, and that's what we're here for tonight. So it may be a little grueling in the duration, and just because the budget's a lot, and we have a lot of funds and a lot of operations and a lot of services, but this is a really important time for the council to say, hold on, something might be missing, or can we consider doing something a little bit differently? And again, we'll try to flag where we see those opportunities, but you may have questions. This budget touches every single thing we do. So you might have questions or feedback on any number of things, and that's totally okay. Our intent, as you've seen from the PowerPoint, is to break it up by fund. So you'll get a handful of slides here and there, and we will stop and take questions and feedback and do it so that you don't have to save up questions for 80 slides or what have you. So hopefully that will work in terms of the cadence of the evening. Because it's a lot, I wanted to offer just a couple of, and I think everything I say is consistent with what you'll hear from our finance director in just a few minutes, but I wanted to highlight a couple of things that are on my mind as far as significant budget considerations as this budget's been rolled together over the last several weeks that I think really warrant your attention. And so 4 thoughts that I wanted to give you before we dig in. One is the general fund, which is our chief operating fund for core operations, is balanced, but barely. It was more challenging to put the general fund together in this budget than it has been for the last few. And as you'll see, it's balanced because of a major and increasing contribution from Measure T, which is our additional sales tax measure. That's a general tax to be used for general purposes, and it makes sense that it would continue to support the general fund. It has since its inception, but that amount is going up. And that's worthy of our concern and consideration. It's okay in this budget. You all, again, may have some other ideas about how we balance, and you'll hear some options. But it's a sign of some concern for the next budget, if nothing else. Our costs are going up faster than our revenues right now. And this is a budget where our direction to all of our departments was essentially hold the line, keep your discretionary costs flat. But when we look at salary through contracts, when we look at pension costs, when we look at healthcare, when we look at insurance, everything is going up. And you'll see that in a lot of detail. But we've got a general fund that's under some strain. And general fund principally provides public safety services, police and fire, and it's getting harder to balance. So we think we're okay. We know we're okay for this budget, but had to do more work to get there than we've had to do in the past. And so we'll spend a fair amount of time on that, but I just wanted to highlight that. Second area of focus is community services. This council spent a lot of time, a couple of meetings back last month, just what I would call getting to know the details of the community services budget. We'll do some more of that tonight. Similar forces are at play, though. A lot of operating costs are going up, even though we're not necessarily expanding operations. There are a few places where we have some new costs, and we'll highlight that. But costs are going up faster than revenues, so we have a budget, again, that's proposed and balanced, but really falls short in the area of capital investment and deferred maintenance. And I think that warrants some consideration as well. The degree to which the council wants to dig in on that tonight or flag some issues for consideration as we move into one of your goals for the upcoming fiscal year, which I see as a longer term, maybe a 5-year financial plan for that fund, is really up to the council. But we're going to flag some considerations and some options for you, because right now we've got a fund that doesn't leave a lot of room for capital. And when I say capital, I really mean taking care of what we've got and the new stuff. That's a different philosophical challenge we'll have to wrestle with, but before we can even get to that, there needs to be some money for it. So definitely an area of focus tonight that we'll spend a fair amount of time on. A lot of the data in the slides you'll see respond to some of the council's questions at the last budget discussion of community services. So hopefully that's helpful and helps you continue to develop an understanding and some ideas on how we might prioritize those resources. Next up on my mind, and this one's mostly good news, is that our enterprise funds, our utility funds, water, wastewater, and electric, are in much better shape than they were last time we developed a budget. And that credit really goes to the council for having to make some hard decisions in terms of how we manage costs and how we structure our rates. And I know that was painful. it's not perfect. We can't do everything we want. There's some challenges in those funds too. But I'd certainly describe them as healthy. And they're at a point where we are able to make a really substantial investment in capital. So you'll see more about that. And I don't think anything there will surprise you. It's a continuation of what we've been talking about, but it is good news. And I wanted to highlight that. And then lastly, we'll walk through a proposed capital improvement program. That's going to look a lot like what you saw last month. It hasn't changed a ton, although there have been a couple of proposed adjustments that we'll walk you through for your feedback. But hopefully it looks familiar and we can, make tweaks as needed to prioritize. As always, we don't have the resources. We'd like to do every project we'd like to. We never will. But we are in a position where we look at grants and the funding sources we do have, and a little creative work where we'll make a major, millions of dollars investment in general capital in the city. So I think we have a capital improvement program outlined that we can all feel good about and feel proud of. And as always, there's some projects we'd like to do in this budget that maybe won't fit. So that's one last area for focus. So those are just 4 from me in a presentation tonight that will touch on dozens of things. Obviously, you all, again, will have feedback or questions about any number of things, and we welcome that. But I wanted to just share a couple of things that are on my mind from a big picture sense as we dig in. And then lastly, I'll just say we have a number of, all of our departments have been working hard on this budget, and we have a number of people from our finance department who are here. I see Nicole and Adrian. I think it's probably obvious when you look at the packet and the tables that went into that and the presentation you'll get tonight that I wouldn't even know how to estimate the hours that went into this, but we have a great team that's really been working hard over the last few months. So hopefully that will show and you can feel good about that. But I just wanted to thank all of them for some good work. So I'm sure I'll have additional thoughts as we go, but I'll turn it over to our finance director at this point.
Thank you, Jeff, and good evening, Mayor and Council members. Katie Edgar, Finance Director here tonight to present the fiscal year 2026-27 and 2027-28 budget workshop. The recommended action tonight is to receive the presentation from City staff on the preliminary proposed budget and provide feedback and direction. Tonight's presentation will start with a review of the budget timeline, how we got here and where we're going, as well as check in on the budget development goals. Next, we'll talk a little bit about the economic outlook and expense drivers that are prevalent citywide. And then we'll dive right into the fun, beginning with the general fund review. We'll continue on to review the major special revenue funds, including Measure T, Transactions and Use Tax, Measure S, Affordable Housing, Measure H, Enhanced Fire Protection, Community Services, and Streets. Then we'll move on to the major enterprise funds, including water, wastewater, drainage, and electric. We'll wrap up with the highlights from the information services, fleet, and building funds. The review of the capital improvement program will also be incorporated throughout the presentation with each relevant fund. While tonight is the first look at the full proposed budget, the budget development process began back in February. The budget development kickoff at the February 2nd council meeting included an overview of the budget development process and provided an opportunity for council feedback on the proposed public engagement efforts. We followed that with a presentation at the February 17th council meeting, providing a mid-year finance update and a current fiscal year review of key financial policies. Public engagement tools were launched on February 20th, and 2 public budget workshops were held on March 3rd and March 4th, with the feedback period ending March 24th. The very next day, Council held their annual goal-setting retreat, and staff continued to work diligently on preparing the proposed departmental budgets. Staff returned to Council on April 20th to present the community feedback gathered in the budget simulation and prioritized tools. At that meeting, staff also presented information on the history and current landscape for the Affordable Housing and Community Services funds, as well as a preview of the Streets Capital Improvement Plan. Tonight, we enter the final stretch of the budget development process as we present the full proposed budget and receive council and public feedback. The proposed capital improvement program will be reviewed by the Planning Commission tomorrow for strategic alignment with the general plan, and the third quarter financial update for the current fiscal year will be included at the May 18th council meeting. Staff will incorporate council direction from tonight's meeting and plan to be back on June 1st with the final proposed budget for adoption. If for any reason we need more time or council wants to review the budget again, we have one more chance to come back and adopt the budget at the June 15th council meeting. The goals that guided this biennial budget development process include aligning budget resources with council goals, prioritizing infrastructure funding, increasing technology transparency, reviewing the financial policies, and continuing to expand public engagement. While the slide here shows these goals checked off the list, they will continue to be used to guide the biennial budget, as the process does not end with the adoption in June. The budget is a plan for the future, and it becomes a living document as staff present updates and adjustments to council as we progress through the year and need to realign resources and priorities at the quarterly updates. Before we dive into budget, it is important to set the stage and acknowledge the current and projected economic conditions shaping our planning environment. The city hosted Dr. Eiler last week at the Lodge for an economic forum where he spoke in depth on various macroeconomic indicators and the specific economic drivers in the city. As of February 26th, the San Francisco Bay Area inflation rate was 2.5%, and inflation has a relatively stable outlook. The federal funds target rate has continued its downward trend and is currently at 3.5 to 3.75, with unemployment relatively stable at 4.4%. While Dr. Eiler shared that in high-frequency forecasts, he projects a 30% chance of recession in 2026, the proposed budget before you tonight makes no assumption of any recessions during the biennial budget period. The city of Healdsburg is unique in many ways, including our diverse economic base. Food tourism and the wine industry are obvious staples in our economy. However, automobile sales and real estate transactions both contribute significantly to our tax base. Dr. Eiler shared that the median home price in the Healdsburg is $1.1 million, and while he is projecting a 2.8% decline in the median home price in the upcoming year, overall property tax revenues are remaining strong due to new development and significant redevelopment. Building upon that relatively positive base, we do have several citywide expenses that are driving up costs. The first is full-time wages and fringe benefit costs, which include salaries and monetary benefits, for example, deferred compensation, bilingual pay, and vacation leave. Notably, this does not include pension costs or insurance costs, which we will cover on the next slide. The chart before you reflects the last 9 years of actual expenses, the estimates to close for the current fiscal year, as well as the proposed budget for fiscal year 26-27 and 27-28. As expected, this chart reflects a relatively consistent upward trend, despite the fact that only one position has been added since fiscal year 21-22. Rising pension costs have been a frequent topic of discussion since 2012, and in recent years, council concerns about increasing insurance costs have also become a significant part of the conversation. Insurance costs are represented in the chart here as 3 separate categories. Workers' compensation insurance is in the pink or magenta color. Employee health insurance costs are represented by the dark blue line, and property and liability insurance is in orange. While all 3 categories have increased over time, the largest concern is surrounding the dark blue employee health insurance costs, which have increased since fiscal year 16-17 by over 173%. The proposed fiscal year 26-27 budget reflects an approximate $375,000 increase over the current fiscal year estimates to close, and the 27-28 budget reflects another $283,000 increase year over year for the total proposed health insurance budget of $2.6 million citywide. This is just shy of the largest light blue line in the chart in front of you, reflecting the pension unfunded accrued liability, also called UAL. Annual required payments total $2.7 million in the proposed 27-28 budget. Essentially, the UAL represents the gap between the pension benefits earned by employees and the assets currently available to pay for those benefits. Employers are required to make annual UAL payments to reduce the shortfall over time, and these costs can change year to year due to investment performance, actuarial assumption changes, or benefit obligations. Unlike the health insurance costs, the consistent increase in pension UAL costs is not a surprise, and current and past city councils have taken many steps to control these rising costs. In addition to issuing pension obligation bonds back in 2012, which have been fully paid off since 22-23, they established a second-tier benefits for classic members, adopted the Pepper Act in 2013, and in 2015, the city established a pension stabilization trust fund with contributions totaling $5.9 million sourced across various funds. As of March 31st, the balance of this trust fund is just over $9 million. The Pension Stabilization Trust Fund policy Council reviewed back at the February 17th meeting encourages limiting trust fund withdrawals to maximize the potential for trust fund growth over time and requires staff to present the budget details on projected UAL costs and anticipated use of the trust. This chart reflects the current UAL payment scheduled for the next 18 years. As I mentioned previously, this chart will change every year based on the investment performance. Additionally, every 4 years, the CalPERS board completes the asset liability management process that often results in actuarial assumption changes that will also affect these scheduled payments. While these annual payments are currently projected to peak in fiscal year 27-28 at $5.7 million, they are currently anticipated to average $5.5 million a year for the following 7 years before starting to decline. Due to the projected continuation of these elevated costs, along with the ongoing risk that an unforeseen economic shock could trigger a recession that reduces projected revenues, staff are not proposing to withdraw any funds from the Pension Stabilization Trust Fund in the proposed budget. While not proposed by staff, as we review the general fund, Council may want to consider this as a potential alternative to balancing the budget. At this point, we'll transition into the fund review portion of the evening. For each fund, we'll review the revenue estimates, proposed expenditures, and fund balance projections. We'll wrap up each fund by highlighting new initiatives included in the budget and any desired initiatives that were ultimately not included in the proposed budget. After each fund, we'll pause for council questions and feedback. I encourage you to request any specific slides you would like to be brought back on screen to aid further discussions if necessary. Before we dive into the fund review, are there any questions on the information provided so far? All right, first up is the general fund. The next two charts covering revenues and expenses will appear throughout tonight's presentation, so I'd like to briefly walk through the layout first. The first column lists the revenue or expense categories, followed by the actual amounts from the prior fiscal year 24-25. The third column shows the amended budget for the current fiscal year 25-26, with the next column reflecting estimated year-end amounts. The final two columns display the proposed budgets for fiscal years 26-27 and 27-28, which will be the primary focus of tonight's discussion. Overall, general fund revenues are proposed at $19.8 million for fiscal year 26-27 and $22.2 million for 27-28. Property tax and vehicle license fee revenues are both projected to increase by 5% annually. Property transfer tax revenues has historically been more volatile, so based on adjusted trend analysis, staff are proposing a reduction in the first year, followed by a 2% increase in the second year. Sales tax revenues are projected to increase by 2% in fiscal year 26-27 and 3% in 27-28, based on detailed analysis and forecasting prepared by our consultants, HDL. Based on the business license tax, revenues are expected to remain generally consistent, with the year-over-year change in the first year reflecting the anticipated normalization of renewal timing. Cannabis business tax revenues are projected to increase slightly in the first year, as fiscal year 26-27 will represent the first full year of operations for both license holders. In the absence of significant historical data or future indicators, staff are projecting flat revenues thereafter. Franchise fee revenues in aggregate are expected to decline slightly, primarily due to continued year-over-year decreases in Comcast revenues and recent stagnation in Recology revenues. Transient occupancy tax revenues are projected to increase by 3% each year. Departmental revenues include charges for services provided by Public Works, Planning and Building, Police, and Fire. Public Works revenue is newly reflected this year and represents engineering inspection fees that were previously recorded in the Streets Fund. This revenue, along with a portion of the Measure G transfer in, offsets Public Works staff time associated with development-related activities that has now been shifted from the Streets Fund to improve transparency within Streets Fund operations. Planning and Building revenues are anticipated to slow in fiscal year 26-27 before rebounding slightly in fiscal year 27-28. These projections are based on the decline in planning reviews over the past 2 years, as building activity typically follows 1 to 2 years after the planning process. Police and fire revenues are expected to remain relatively stable, with the exception that prior year fire revenues included significant strike team mutual aid reimbursements that are not included in the proposed budget. Before moving on from the general fund revenues, I'd like to highlight the Measure T transfers in. For the first year, staff are proposing a transfer of $900,000 from Measure T, which is generally consistent with the amount in the prior budget cycle. However, in fiscal year 27-28, the proposed transfers increases to $2.7 million in order to present a balanced general fund budget. Proposed general fund expenditures total $20.7 million in fiscal year 26-27 and $21.9 million in 27-28. In 26-27, the legal and fire departments are the only departments proposed to decrease compared to the current year, primarily due to one-time increases in litigation costs and strike team deployment activity that are not included in the proposed budget. In fiscal year 27-28, all departments except legal are projected to increase again, largely driven by the rising staffing and insurance costs discussed earlier. During budget development, departments were directed to maintain flat budgets for discretionary line items wherever possible. However, most departments still experienced increases in areas such as utilities and software costs, which were not considered discretionary expenditures for budgeting purposes. This pie chart may look familiar as we've reviewed it a few times throughout this process. This chart reflects the current proposed biennial budget and illustrates how the increasing citywide cost drivers are amplified in the general fund due to 65% of the fund accounting for wages and benefits, and internal service funds, including the insurance fund, accounting for 13%. Putting it all together, this chart summarizes the general fund balance and follows the same column layout as the revenue expense charts. The first row shows the beginning fund balance, followed by total revenues for the year, total expenditures for the year, and the ending fund balance. The final row is an important indicator of the fund's structural balance, as the change in fund balance reflects whether revenues coming in exceed expenditures going out or vice versa. In the current fiscal year, revenues are projected to exceed the adopted budget by approximately $428,000, while expenditures are anticipated to come in about $685,000 below budget. As a result, the unrestricted ending fund balance is projected to total approximately $1.85 million. In fiscal year 26-27, total revenues are projected to be approximately $946,000 less than proposed expenditures, requiring the use of available unrestricted fund balance to support operations. In fiscal year 27-28, proposed revenues are projected to exceed expenditures by approximately $241,000. However, this is largely attributed to the increased Measure T transfer included in that year's budget. This chart illustrates the historical and projected trends in general fund revenues and expenditures. Over the 12-year period shown, expenditures exceeded revenues in 4 of those years. While occasional deficits are not inherently problematic, it is important to remain mindful of maintaining a balance between ongoing revenues and ongoing expenditures to support the city's long-term fiscal sustainability. This chart illustrates 12 years of historical and projected general fund contributions received from Measure T. Over time, the contribution amounts have increased gradually until a significant increase proposed in fiscal year 27-28. In the absence of substantial growth or expansion of the existing general fund revenue base, the general fund's reliance on Measure T revenues is likely to continue increasing. City staff took several steps to address the projected deficit between the general fund revenues and expenditures. The first step was to reassess the internal service budgets and reduce the planned vehicle replacement fees in both fiscal years. While this lowers current expenditures, it also reduces the funding set aside for future vehicle replacements and may place additional pressure on replacement schedules, potentially requiring some replacements to be deferred in the future. The information services budget was also reviewed, and discretionary initiatives were scaled back, resulting in lower internal services charges. In addition, departmental contracted services budget were reduced by more than $100,000 in each fiscal year. Rather than allocating the anticipated fiscal year 25-26 general fund surplus towards one-time expenditures, staff are proposing to use the additional unrestricted fund balance to support ongoing expenditures in the following years. Finally, staff are proposing an increase of approximately 1.8 million in the Measure T contribution in fiscal year 27-28 in order to present the balanced general fund budget. The proposed budget does include several new initiatives supported by one-time expenditures. The police department is proposing to expand services through the addition of a no-bite K-9 program intended to improve operational effectiveness and support staff retention at a proposed cost of $75,000. The city manager's department includes $50,000 for anticipated election costs, and the finance department includes $55,000 for a procurement software designed to streamline the city's purchasing process. The Community Development Department also includes $55,000 to support succession planning for the building official position during a transition period, allowing for essential training and the transfer of institutional knowledge. Several requested items were ultimately not included in the proposed budget due to funding constraints. These include an additional police officer position, a full-time parking enforcement officer, contract support for planning and building software development, and replacement of the fire department's self-contained breathing apparatuses. The breathing apparatus replacement is currently tied to a pending grant application and may be brought forward during the upcoming fiscal year if grant funding is awarded. At this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions about the proposed general fund budget, and I appreciate your feedback.
Thank you. Who'd like to go first?
Yeah, I had a
Mayor?
couple questions.
Yep.
On the, we were looking at the K-9 program. You said it's a no-bite program. Is that going to increase our insurance? Is that calculated in this also? And if you could explain what the no-bite K-9 program is.
Yeah, so I think most people are familiar with police canines being the apprehension style canine where they're released after fleeing subjects. We're not proposing a canine that acts in that capacity. It would be a canine that will actively search for missing people, can search for subjects, wanted people, articles, whether they're guns, discarded clothing, things along those lines. But it's a passive alert to the handler that, you know, if person's over here, we're going to go that way. If you're familiar with Katati's canine Dolly, the bloodhound, it'd be similar in that capacity that we're looking at. As far as increase in liability, I'll defer, but I don't believe there would be any increase in liability coverage based on what we're proposing.
All right, thank you. And then the other question I have is on the cannabis business tax. It looks like it's contributing quite a bit to our funds. Are we concerned that overall statewide there's a 7% or so decrease in sales? Are we confident that we are going to continue this increase now that they've been in business for a year? Do we see a slowing down trend? Do you have any input on that?
So for one of the businesses, we just barely got a full year's worth of operating data, and the other business has been open for almost a year and a half. So it's not really enough information to see trends. So I can't really speak to that. We have proposed a flat budget year over year. We annualized their revenue for the missing months for the one business and then just proposed a flat revenue. It is entirely possible that we do see slowing, but current year, we have not seen a specific trend that would indicate that.
I just don't want us to get in the trap of looking at this is going to be great money coming in and then it slows down. So we could be a little optimistic on that fund. Thank you.
Okay.
So I have a couple questions, and I'd like to first ask, what was the total amount of the original deficit that you had to find money for?
So it was originally around $2 million. We were able to bring it down to about 1.7, which is where we ended up backfilling with Measure T.
And to that point, Measure T funds of 2.7 million. To me, that's a huge red flag, and it kind of makes my stomach churn a little bit. So I wonder if you could talk about that as it looks to the future. And we're taking that money from other areas and putting it into the general fund. Although I know Measure T is general fund money, but we always had it earmarked for public safety and streets and so on. So can you talk about that a little bit? Because to me, that's a huge red flag.
I totally agree with you. I think it has been in our long-term projections, specifically the ones we shared last budget development. It is not a surprise that we are increasingly dependent on Measure T. It has been known that expenditures in the general fund are increasing generally more than our revenue base is. We have not added any new kind of revenue sources except for cannabis business tax, which at $140,000 out of a $19 million budget is a drop in the bucket. Looking at the expenditures, fire and police are increasing significantly year over year. So if we look, for example, at the finance budget, the salary increases and insurance increases, which are the primary kind of non-discretionary drivers here, as well as utility cost is another one that has hit some of these departments pretty high. In most of the budgets, it was about $100,000 to $200,000 a year. However, in police, that increase is over $400,000 from year to year, and in fire, it's almost $300,000. So the magnitude, because police and fire are such a big proportion of our general fund budget, when those costs are rising, they are amplified, and so the Measure T is required to support that.
So I know as we go further into this, we'll probably talk about the street funds and whatnot and how we're going to come up with money for those. So I won't ask about that. So yeah, I mean, the concern is that there's not a whole lot of discretionary spending going on here. That, you know, the revenues are going to be what they are and the expenses continue to go up. So I think it's just, my messaging would be we need to really be thinking about that and cautious about that, not just think, oh, you know, we're in great shape, because that's not an indicator of being in great shape.
No, and I don't think we're alone in that. Many other cities are currently facing similar scenarios and are going for adding to their revenue base, whether that be through additional sales tax measures or other creative measures that they are going through. So we are definitely not alone in this trend, which is why I say it's not kind of surprising. Unfortunately, it is the only other answer is really to increase the revenue sources. We have tried to stay relatively consistent with our expenditures, and without reducing the service levels, there's not much more room to cut discretionary spending in the general fund.
So would looking into a sales tax increase measure be something that we would want to look to in the future, moving forward, perhaps?
I would say that's a question for all of you. What I will say, before even trying to answer that, I will offer a little bit of updated information from a conversation we had, gosh, I think a year ago, with the evolving landscape in terms of legislation related to sales tax caps. I just want to put out a clarification that our current understanding, even though we're at the cap here, is that cities get 1% to add on, irrespective of that cap. This has been, it sounds like a simple question. It's been supremely complicated to unravel. But based on what we're seeing, one town to the south, which is pursuing a full percent right now, we think there probably is a half cent available just legally. Obviously, there's a much more complicated question about when it's the right time. If there is one, is that the will of the council? Nobody would feel good about adding a tax. But we'll get to the Measure T budget in just a second, right? Which is a half cent transactions and use tax. So you all can do some quick math and figure out what an extra half cent might amount to, and it would be real money and it would make a difference. So I understand it's a much harder conversation in terms of, is that the right tactic and when is the right time to do it? But I think we at least have to ask ourselves that question, because it would be really substantial in terms of the ability to, when Measure T passed, it was, I don't know quite what the breakdown is. There was a little bit going to these general operations, right? Police and fire are 75% of our general fund. And positions, I think, really from the start have been funded by that sales tax we have. But as more and more of it gets gobbled up, If there were more, it would bring us back to that time when there was the ability to use that measure to do additional projects, streets. And that's gotten really difficult right now. So I don't have a yes, no to that question, but I think it's something we should be thinking about. It's not urgent is the good news, but it's maybe better to get out in front of these issues than to wait and be in an emergency.
Yeah, I think so too. Just to confirm, the Measure T tax, we had it on the ballot not too long ago to renew, and there's no sunset at this point until the city or taxpayers decide to remove it on a ballot measure. Is that how it would work?
That is correct. There is no sunset.
Okay, so we can count on that at least, most likely for a long time. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad you stopped on this slide. Just like last time where I wanted to kind of see the look back, which I really appreciate all these slides kind of went back so we could see the trends and how we were looking before COVID and all of that, or the hotels opening. You know, and we'll get to it later, but I think insurance is one of the things that is just a huge kind of unknown versus, you know, we've gone through labor negotiations and there's always increases here and there, and we kind of have an idea, and now we're kind of seeing it all come together. But just 2930, like what, or 2829, like if there was one more line on there, is that continuing up, trending, like maybe down? Do you, any peek behind that curtain?
I think that is really dependent on how revenues perform. So property tax and sales tax are our two largest revenue sources. They account for more than 50% of the revenue in the general fund. Property tax is currently projected at a 5% year-over-year increase. In general, Sonoma County, the property tax roll is expected to increase from 3 to 5% a year. As I mentioned earlier, the property values in general in Healdsburg tend to be higher than in Sonoma County on average. And property tax values do get reassessed anytime a home is sold. And so if the market continues and homes sell and they get reassessed, it is possible, and it has happened in the past, that our property tax roll has grown much more significantly than 5% in a year. For example, 2 years ago, it grew 15%. That was largely driven to the sale of large developments that were being completed. However, we do still have developments that are potentially going to continue selling and continue being assessed. So there is always the possibility, and we always hope for those sales bases to increase. I will say sales tax has also been in a relative lull for the past few years. We had 2 years of year-over-year decline in sales tax, which is generally not common. The common expectation is you're going to get that 3% growth year over year. We are not seeing that right now. And generally, consumer spending has been what is supporting the economy on a global level. However, we're not necessarily seeing that translate into our local sales tax contributions. So I can't tell you what it would look like without going through, but if I had to take a guess, I would say it's not going to go down significantly. The only way it really will is if we see kind of those other main revenue bases continue to go up, which I do think they will. It is generally try to be conservative when budgeting revenue. We would like to have more money come in and deal with that later rather than less. So it is possible.
Okay, yeah, I think just as a general commentary, when I'm looking at these kind of challenges that pop up, I want to look at the opportunities where we can increase the revenue, not from, oh, let's just throw another tax, a sales tax on, but how can we help the local businesses generate more revenue, our car dealerships, and kind of look at that along with tightening the budget. So I think we're at a real crucial stage right now, especially when you're looking at what else is going on, that as we're going through this, there's going to be some things that, you know, I think we're all kind of highlighting, like, okay, let's focus on that and move forward. And so that's all I had on this one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before we go to Councilmember Kelly's question, I just wanted to mention that she warned us that she's recovering from laryngitis, so we're going to be extra quiet so we can hear her speak. And I just want to say thank you for being here. I know it probably wasn't easy for you to do that.
Thank you. And I know I sound completely ridiculous, so I apologize. I just want to echo some of the comments of my colleagues that I think I recall a time when we had so much more flexibility in that sales tax fund. I mean, before it was Measure T, whatever the letter was before, and that we really were able to do a lot of those roadway projects, or when emergency repairs had to happen in any of the funds, like that we were able to use that in an effective way. And so it does cause me some concern that so much of it is allocated to full-time staff positions, that we really, I think we're lucky that we have consistent sales tax revenue, because if it wasn't, I would say we should not be funding salaries out of a tax that can go up and down. That said, I think I want to echo the sentiments of what Councilmember Mitchell and Higley said about just looking at our revenue and continuing to get out in front of it. We just have so many fellow cities in Sonoma County right now in a very dire financial situation. And I'm grateful that we are not, but also like not wanting to take our eye off of what those projections look like, knowing what our increasing expenses and unfunded pension liabilities and other those things, we can't not have those expenses. So ensuring that the revenue's there is really important. I'm sorry.
No, thank you. Good questions, everybody. A quick one for Police Chief. I don't think you need to get up for this, but there's a reduction. It mentioned no full-time parking enforcement. We're going to keep the part-time position that we have now as is. Is that right?
I knew I didn't have to get up. It'll be easier for everyone to hear.
Okay.
So we have 2 to 3 part-time parking enforcement officer positions as part of our budget.
Mhm.
Part-time parking enforcement has been historically a very difficult position to fill and keep filled. So we were looking at whether if we moved it to a full-time position with increased consistency and enforcement, increased revenues there to help offset that cost. We did have a police recruit temporarily reassigned to that position for about a 3-month period. We saw closer to a net zero, but it's still there. It's not a net zero between enforcement and the cost of the position. So it just goes back to having consistency and enforcement.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And then this sort of I don't know. I don't want the answer to this question to be too long, but I share the anxiety that we have about dipping into Measure T for these non-discretionary expenditures. But I'm wondering, without it, what kind of pivot we would have to make? Would it just be cutting positions and some of those harder choices? Is that what we're able to avoid by doing this?
Yeah, so there's a couple different options. I mean, like I said, the Pension Stabilization Trust Fund does have $9 million in it. Based on the projected continued increase, I would say from a long-term financial sustainability perspective, it would not help us over the next 7 years if we used that to pay down costs this year, because we'll just be back into that issue in the next year. But we could pull some amounts from there to kind of help alleviate some of those Measure T funds. We also could be directed to cut additional contracted or operational costs. They would not be painless, but there are some budgets in the discretionary items that we could be directed to reduce costs. They will not get anywhere near that $1.7 million, but we could make some of those conscious kind of cost-saving measures. But yes, if you want to reduce significant ongoing costs, reducing the workforce is the only long-term way to realize those savings.
Okay, thank you. I just want to clarify that I approve of the present direction, but I just wanted to kind of get a broader picture of what could or couldn't happen. So do we have any other questions on this section of the presentation? Okay, I'd like to go ahead and proceed then.
Okay, up next is the Measure T Transactions and Use Tax Fund. Transactions and use tax revenues are collected on the sales of good occurring within the city limits or delivered to city residents and include transactions such as online purchases by Healdsburg residents or car purchases by Healdsburg residents. Use tax revenues are projected to increase by 1% and 3% respectively. In recent years, Measure T has been used to support several direct initiatives. These include translation services at city council meetings, financial support for the Chamber of Commerce, the low-income utility discount program called CARE for water and wastewater and drainage utility customers, and the contract with Corazon providing supportive outreach services to the Latino community. Consistent with the budget development goal of prioritizing infrastructure, staff are proposing to fund several drainage projects that have been consistently deferred and several streets projects. This slide summarizes Measure T expenditures into several major categories. First are the directly funded initiatives, which total approximately $200,000 per year. It also includes the general fund operating transfers we have been discussing, as well as transfers to the Streets Operating Fund, which we'll review in more detail during that section of the presentation. Over the course of the proposed two-year budget, staff are recommending the allocation of nearly $1.4 million to streets capital projects and approximately $600,000 to drainage capital projects. In total, expenditures are proposed at $2.4 million in the first year and $4.3 million in the second year. Looking at the fund balance, the lower expenditures in fiscal year 26-27 are expected to result in an ending balance of approximately $1.5 million, which will then be used to support the higher level of expenditures in fiscal year 27-28. At the conclusion of the two-year budget cycle, staff anticipate an ending fund balance of approximately $240,000. While the proposed budget continues to include funding for the Sunset Drive Slope Stabilization and Road Repair Project, staff are now recommending deferring the project by 1 year, which is different from the April 20th budget development check-in direction. As a result, design funding is shifted to fiscal year 27-28, and construction funding is now anticipated in fiscal year 28-29. Staff have also deferred the proposed drainage stream gauge monitoring project and have not included Measure T funding for the pavement preventative maintenance project in this cycle. The intent behind these adjustments to the capital improvement program was to free up sufficient funding to support the necessary general fund contributions. There are alternative approaches, which we discussed, and we welcome Council's feedback on the proposed solution for the general fund deficit. At this point, I'm happy to answer questions you have on Measure T.
Yeah, in looking at our low-income utility discounts, are we seeing a larger number to a fewer individuals, or are we seeing more individuals participating in the program? And kind of the third part of that, as our AMI changes, are we getting more people in the program? I'm concerned that as we're having financial difficulties, it's just a reflection of what our residents are having and more people are participating.
I can't speak off the top of my head to the number of participants year over year. I can say that the amount of funding year over year is increasing, and that's largely because it is a percentage-based program. And so as rates increase, so does the discount we provide.
It's a pretty healthy increase we're looking year over year.
And that is based largely on the anticipation of both utility rate increases, and we have, every time we have new low-income properties, they are auto-enrolled into CARE. And so we have several new properties that are being built. We have the affordable housing being built by Freebird, as well as the affordable housing in the North Village that's being built. And so these projections do assume some increase in in participation due to those new housing coming on the market.
Okay, I'll check back in for the remainder when we get to the electric rates.
I have a question from Councilmember Kelly, who texted it over here to me. How are we paying for pavement preventative maintenance if it's not coming from Measure T?
That's a great question. So it is funded, and it is the same level of funded that we had proposed at the April 20th meeting. If you recall, we had not proposed any Measure T funding at that time. It is being funded. We'll talk more when we get to the streets fund, but it has several different funding sources on that project.
Yeah, you said the sales tax revenue on the car purchases by Healdsburg residents. What about people? Are there a lot of people who buy cars in Healdsburg that aren't living in Healdsburg? Don't we get taxed from those too?
So we do get the Bradley Burns sales tax that goes into the general fund. However, the transactions and use tax is based on the location which you are receiving the goods, or in the case of vehicle purchases, where you are registering it. So if you register your vehicle in Healdsburg, do we collect the Measure T tax, on that revenue.
Okay. And then on the expenditure side, I'm confused a little bit by the Healdsburg Ave complete streets. It looks like I didn't think we'd even really started that yet, but we're showing it like done.
That is a great question. So for the budget, all of the budget slides we'll see tonight, all of the capital projects, if the amount was appropriated in the current fiscal year for budget development process, as we track fund balance year over year, we assume that it is going to be fully spent. Our process is we will come back to you every year in September. We bring you and present the capital improvement program rollover process. And that is the time where we say, okay, we had budgeted $2.8 million. We spent $2 million, so we need to reappropriate that $800,000. For budget development purposes, we simply leave it all in there as assumed expenditures, not based on timing, but based on tracking that fund balance, so we don't accidentally appropriate that twice.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Are there any other questions? Okay.
Okay, moving on to Measure S Affordable Housing Fund. Measure S, approved in November 2016, increased the transient occupancy tax collected on hotel stays within the city by 2%, with the additional revenue dedicated to supporting affordable housing. Revenues for 26-27 and 27-28 are projected just over $1.5 million a year. Proposed expenses have remained relatively stable, with annual expenditures projected at approximately $1.8 million each year. The proposed budget supports 2 full-time staff, and through contracts with local nonprofit partners, case management and street outreach services, monitoring of affordable for sale and housing, and shower services. Notably, both the current year's estimates to close and the proposed budgets include fully funding the L&M Village operations. While the County Board of Supervisors has approved an agenda item awarding the city $900,000 to fund current year operations, the grant agreement is still pending, and therefore it is not reflected in the side before you today. While the county has indicated they are working on including additional funding for ongoing operations in their upcoming budget development process, the amount, timing, and the mechanism of the city receiving any funding is still unknown. Based on the projected ending fund balance for fiscal year 27-28, this chart indicates that available funding will not be sufficient to fully support L&M Village operations. However, as I previously mentioned, due to the pending grant agreement, it is anticipated that the current year's transfers out to the L&M Village will not be necessary. As a result, the fund balance will likely remain positive for an additional year, with an estimated ending balance of $778,000 in fiscal year 27-28. In addition, for funding for the L&M Village operations, The proposed budget includes a non-recurring allocation of $50,000 for repairs and maintenance to complete the renovation of room 1 at the L&M Village. Notably, the proposed budget does not include any funding for new housing development loans, to create a homeownership program, or to make contributions to the Emerging Housing Trust Fund. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Go ahead.
When I saw this, it was a huge red flag, I think. When we're looking at Measure S and we talk about all the things we want to do, whether it's silent seconds or the housing trust and all these other things. I'm glad that we had that pending agreement with the county, but I think we're all looking at the reality of the funding might be drying up from the state and county level. And so where I feel like we need to get to a place is, really looking at what is the next phase of L&M in terms of funding and wraparound services and what's needed. Who are we serving with maybe more of a local focus if the funding's not coming from outside the area, and trying to pivot the L&M a little bit more toward the next phase, especially if we're getting close to functional zero. So I think, again, there's a lot of things in here that I think are highlighting a lot of good discussion topics that are going to be very, very challenging that we have to address, that have a lot of nuance to them and requirements we got to navigate through. But I think this one, I just wanted to highlight that, seeing the number go from 25 grand to 845. I mean, that's a chunk. 845 and then 852 and 850. And I think our revenues were going up to like 1.6 million, which is great. But the intention is to, all right, let's get, what can we do? I mean, there's a whole lot of things we could use those funds for. And this L&M is a great project, but I think it just highlights, we need to keep our eye on that one for sure.
I agree with you 100% on that. And I know that the county, I think, has, hopefully they will come through for more years. I know there was some discussion about that right at their meeting where they were talking about funding the Project Home Keys, both Healdsburg and Rohnert Park, going into the future. So I guess that would be an upside to this budget, but I think the functional zero and the fact that this is all on the city of Healdsburg and we are the North County, maybe there's another way to look at getting some funding from Windsor or Cloverdale, or, I don't know if there's any possibilities of that. Have we looked at that?
I'd have to defer to our housing director for that.
Stephen Sotomayor, Housing Director. Yeah, I think that's definitely something that's a possibility moving forward. I think we're hopeful that the county will come up with a funding solution, or at least they've indicated that they're looking at that as part of their development budget process, but the total dollar amount is really the question that we might have. To the comment that where do we go from here? The state agreement has us operating this under a 15-year contract, but that doesn't account for if the situation changes. And so that, I think that's definitely on the table too. But I have noticed that there's been kind of an outreach from Windsor to coordinate a regional conversation again around homelessness. And therefore, it might be time to start informing people that if we don't get the full county funding, that this could be more of a regional effort if necessary.
I wanted to just add that I've been struggling basically to have meetings and further the conversation with Supervisor Gore's office, and it's sort of been transferred to, let me get the office name right here, the Health Services Agency Director, Nolan Sullivan, and he's communicated with us, and there is a meeting in the works. And the idea here is that we can actually sit down and start to scope out the future. But it's been a big concern of mine seeing this situation developing, that we, get a clear idea of what is and isn't possible coming from the county. Of course, our intention is to hold them to their agreement, and because we are serving a huge chunk of Sonoma County with the L&M, so that's been a priority of mine. And as soon as there is some sort of discussion, I would certainly report that to the council. But right now, we're just trying to get that meeting.
If I could just quickly, I also want to just underscore that there's really two components of what we are expecting / hoping to receive from the county. In the current fiscal year, as you heard, we have a grant award from the county for $900,000. They went through a process, they made selections, the Board of Supervisors voted. We are now in this familiar part of the cycle where we wait for a grant agreement, but I think I could speak for our whole team. We are highly confident that that money will materialize. That takes care of 25, 26, the year that's almost over, and trickles throughout those fund balances on the bottom of the screen here, 900, that screen, 900,000 to the good. So take some of the urgency away. And then, well, what do we do here? Right. Every year we do this. And I will give some credit to the county. Every year they ultimately, albeit in arrears, have thus far come through to help us with the L&M. But once you take all of those numbers on the bottom row and add 900,000, we're still looking forward to the point that several of you had made, which we agree with, some regional support for this facility. And they have once again indicated a willingness to, as the mayor said, entertain the conversation. And you have our word that we'll stay on it. I still think all of the questions about what's the future of that facility make sense. Right, we don't budget on wishful thinking. We budget on what's secure right now. And as long as that's the case, you see, right, this is becoming a homelessness response fund, which is not, it's not inconsistent with what the voters approved, but it's not everything that they expected. And I think we feel that pressure to continue to have money to make more units come online. And so as long as we've got those negative numbers, we either need to, we'll stay on the county. We will consider other funding sources and partnerships that might be out there. We might need to tighten our belts about what this program looks like. All of those options are on the table, and we'll keep, I know we'll keep talking about that.
Before I go to the vice mayor, are there any questions for the housing director while he's up? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, following up on what Councilman Hagley said, are we able to use pressure because we got money from the county for regional? If we don't get that money from the county, can we focus strictly on Healdsburg and kind of let them know that, hey, if you want us to continue to be a North Bay hub, maybe they could put the pressure on. I know it's not much in Cloverdale and Windsor, but for them to be aware of that we are taking the brunt of this in our budget meeting and not them, if that would be a helpful approach in when you have the meeting with the health director.
I think they're pretty aware of where we're at in as far as the other cities in the North County. They also do participate. They have, as part of the overarching program when Reach for Home got the encampment resolution funding, they operate homes also in Cloverdale and Windsor as well. And Windsor has contributed a home to that, that they are able to use to keep people through the pipeline of housing. But I think that they understand that. I think that it's providing a very big regional service. In fact, it's providing a service that county outreach teams traditionally would take over for unincorporated areas. So there's a natural nexus to saying that the county should support it, as they have done. And as far as like the future use, I mean, I think there is, definitely to take a look at to size it again or to have conversations with the state. But all the possibilities are still there, I think, as far as how we continue the operations. And so having that conversation, I think we made it very clear to the county where we stand as far as what we expect from that contract. And there's surprisingly, there's different funding sources out there that actually do align better to the purpose that we're having that the county has recently gotten. So I'm hopeful that they'll be able to continue that operational funding at this point.
All right, thank you.
All right, any more questions before we move on to Measure H? Okay.
Okay, Measure H, enhanced fire protection. In March 24, the voters passed Measure H, enacting a countywide half-a-cent transactions and use tax. This tax applies to all taxable retail sales throughout Sonoma County, including both incorporated cities and unincorporated areas. The sales tax is projected to bring in over $1.6 million each year. In the current fiscal year, expenditures are primarily associated with the fire inspector position, while contracted services support completion of the standards of cover study. The study is intended to evaluate existing fire and emergency services, identify community risks, and help establish appropriate response and coverage standards. Expenditures for fiscal year 26-27 are proposed at approximately $1.8 million, decreasing to $387,000 in fiscal year 27-28. The goal is to strategically deploy these new revenues, and as a result, the fund has been accumulating funding pending completion of the standards of cover study. The study is currently well underway, and staff anticipate returning to council following budget adoption to provide additional implementation recommendations and directions. At this time, the projected fund balance at the end of fiscal year 27-28 is approximately $3.6 million. Included in the proposed budget is a one-time allocation of $810,000 in fiscal year 26-27 to implement phase 1 of the upgrades identified in the recently completed fire facilities assessment. In addition, funding is included to support the operationalization of Fire Station 2, including the purchase of necessary materials and supplies for that location. No additional positions or equipment are proposed at this time. However, staffing needs are anticipated to be part of the discussion when staff return to council to present the results of the standards of cover study.
Okay, questions, Vice Mayor?
Yeah, does our, I think it's called Fire Safe software that you're using, is that covered under Measure H, or does that come out of the general fund?
The general fund.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Kelly, do you have any questions?
It's a pretty large fund balance. What is the timeline on the standards of cover study coming back?
Thank you, Councilmember Kelly. As you know, the standards of cover is well underway. It's currently under technical review from the consultants. I'm expecting to see a final draft maybe this week or next. And my plan is to bring it to council prior to the July recess. I apologize, it's taking longer than expected, and we're doing everything we can to move it forward, but I anticipate it'll be done and brought to council prior to July.
And then what's the process after it comes forward? Like then what?
Well, after it comes forward and it's adopted, we will gather back up and put together an implementation plan that'll include any large equipment purchases, some type of sustainable staffing pattern for Station 2, and a year-over-year vegetation management plan.
What is this? What does a sustainable staffing pattern mean?
A sustainable staffing pattern is staffing that will not impact the general fund, but can be fully funded by Measure H in the years to come.
Got it. Okay.
Does that make sense? So as we budget for a year over year, whatever plan we bring forward will be covered in a sustainable fashion. So we're not making hires or purchases that then will either have to be cut or then impact the general fund. That's the plan, right?
Sustainable meant, I didn't understand what a staffing pattern meant.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Just exactly what that staffing would look like, whether it's daytime staffing, 24-hour staffing, 2 people, 3 people. Those are the kind of recommendations we're waiting to hear from the consultant on. Sorry, I misunderstood your question.
Okay, no, thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, I don't think we have any other questions. Okay, go ahead.
And that standard of coverage takes in the calls that we get in that area to determine staffing and what type of staffing we'd need?
Sure, and not only that area, but the city and the response, our entire response area. It's very data heavy and analyzes our response times, how many firefighters we get on scene and what amount of time, where the calls are, what time of the day they are, how long we're on scene. It should be a pretty comprehensive data analysis out of which we can pull some data that'll help us figure out the best use of Measure H for staffing. For example, one of the things come to find out is that a large portion of our calls are between 8 in the morning and 8 at night. So that's something we need to consider as we move forward.
All right, thank you.
I'll
Definitely
also just
interesting.
add, in terms of a staffing deployment plan, and the chief mentioned this, but I wanted to underline it. Agree with Councilmember Kelly's point that we've accumulated a nice fund balance here. While we don't know, and ultimately we'll bring a recommendation to all of you on future staffing, I'm going to go out on a limb and say whatever that staffing model is, it's probably going to necessitate some sort of a vehicle. And something we've learned, I was going to say we've learned, but we know is that fire apparatus, costs a fortune. So I think having the fund balance will serve us well when that time comes. Also just want to repeat something you heard in one of the previous slides, that we are proposing to spend down a little bit of that balance by deploying phase 1 of the facility needs for the current station. This is a little backwards, but we wanted to reserve this funding right now. At the next council meeting, just a week from tonight, you all will receive a presentation on the police and fire facility assessment. So a little bit more about the work that we've done to identify needs at both facilities. Police does not have a special sales tax at this time, so that will be a little trickier, but it's good to know what your needs are. Fortunately, with fire, we do have an opportunity to start chipping away at those needs and making some enhancements to the existing station, which needs a little bit of love. So that's, I might say it is a minority share of the fund balance, but I just wanted to highlight that that's in a budget that doesn't have, quite as many opportunities as we'd like to drop a large sum into a need. That is one case where we're able to do so. So something to feel good about in this budget.
Yeah, and I would back that up by saying I do anticipate at least one large equipment purchase. What that is, I'll bring back to council, but also included in that is vegetation management and fuels reduction funding year over year. So I hope to bring you back a more comprehensive plan shortly.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on this? All right, moving on to community services then.
The Community Services Fund is primarily supported by transient occupancy tax revenues, as 10% of the city's total 14% TOT is restricted for community services. TOT revenues can be variable from year to year. However, current projections show approximately 6% year-over-year growth, partially driven by the opening of the new Appalachian Hotel. The aggregate average occupancy rate has declined from 58% in the prior year to approximately 54% in the current year. In contrast, the weighted average nightly room rate has increased from $428 a night to $447 a night. The proposed budget reflects a total 3% year-over-year growth in TOT revenues in both years. Other revenues, including interest earnings, grants, donations, and program revenues, are projected at $1.5 million in 26-27 and $1.4 million in 27-28. The proposed expenses in fiscal year 26-27 total $8.9 million and $9.1 million in fiscal year 27-28. Notably, this does not include any funding for capital projects or deferred park maintenance. The proposed budget fully meets the operating reserve target of 30% of annual operating expenses and is projected to result in an unrestricted fund balance of approximately $477,000 at the end of fiscal year 27-28. However, I would like to bring your attention to the change in fund balance line in this chart. In fiscal year 27-28, total operating expenditures fully utilize annual revenues, with only $44,000 remaining. Meaning the remaining unrestricted fund balance reflects a one-time revenue source. Any reduction in the projected revenues would directly reduce this available balance. This structure also highlights that absent significant revenue growth or a shift in operational priorities, there is no ongoing funding capacity to support parks deferred maintenance or capital projects. This chart reflects the historical trend in community services expenses and may look familiar as it was first reviewed during the April 20th budget development check-in. At that meeting, council members noted that the prior chart began during the COVID-19 pandemic and requested additional historical data to better contextualize the trends being presented. The updated 10-year history shows community services expenditures increasing from approximately $4 million annually in fiscal year 16-17 to a proposed $9 million in fiscal year 27-28. This growth has largely tracked with the increase in transient occupancy tax revenues, with the most significant increase occurring in fiscal year 21-22 following the opening of the Montage Hotel. Notably, the opening of the Montage largely offset the financial impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, which ultimately proved to be relatively short in duration from a TOT revenue perspective. For the first 2 years of increased revenue, Council strategically invested significant amounts into capital. However, over time, operations have continued to expand year over year. This chart reflects the same historical trend in community services expenditures. However, this view presents expenses by program area. In response to Council's request during the April 20th Budget Development Check-in meeting to review the fully burdened program costs, full-time salaries and administrative expenses were allocated among programs based on estimated staffing allocations. While the individual programs may be difficult to distinguish within this chart, I would like to highlight the proportional changes that have occurred over time. From fiscal year 16-17 to 27-28, the community center share of total expenditures has decreased by approximately 7%, Parks and Trails has decreased by 6%, and recreation programs by 3%. Conversely, special events has increased proportionally by approximately 7%, general administration by 5%, and the Foley Pavilion by 3%. Notably, the increase in general administration is largely attributed to the project manager position that was added in fiscal year 22-23 to support implementation of community services capital projects, and the Foley Pavilion program being a brand new program. This chart reflects the proposed 26-27 community services program expenses as a share of the total operating budget. Essentially, it isolates a single year from the previous chart to better illustrate the relative size of each program. Parks and Trails is the largest program in terms of overall expenses, accounting for approximately 26% of the proposed operating budget. Recreation programs and senior services follow, each representing approximately 13% of total proposed expenses. Special events accounts for approximately 10% of proposed expenses, while the community center and general administration each represent approximately 8%. The ACES after-school program falls closely behind at 7%, with the remaining programs each accounting for less than 5% of the total budget. This chart should also look familiar from the April 20th budget check-in meeting, and it has been updated to reflect the fully burdened program costs, including estimated allocations for staffing and administrative expenses as requested by Council. The chart is organized by program in descending order based on total proposed expenses. Many programs incorporate some level of cost recovery reflected in the revenue column. For example, recreation programs generate enrollment fee revenue, senior services receive revenue from memberships and bus ticket sales, and the ACES after-school program is partially supported through state grant funding. However, several programs and services are provided with limited or no direct cost recovery mechanisms. The final column in the chart reflects the total net cost to the city, effectively illustrating the amount of TOT revenue supporting each program area. This pie chart illustrates the final column from the previous slide, showing the total net cost for the city by program area. From a net cost perspective, Parks and Trails remains the most expensive program area, with senior services representing the second highest net cost. Special events is ranked third, followed by recreation programs and the community center. This view helps illustrate which programs rely most heavily on TOT revenues after accounting for program-generated revenues and other cost recovery sources. Overall, the proposed budget includes several operational changes. One of the most important policy and operational changes relates to the supporting operations at the Foley Pavilion, as this represents a new facility and a shift in operational approach that will benefit from Council's input and direction. Staff are proposing approximately $90,000 annually for ongoing operational support, including approximately $30,000 per year for utilities and telecom expenses, $25,000 a year for repairs and operational expenses, and approximately $40,000 a year for part-time staffing support. This operational model is based on the current council direction to accommodate only those events already approved within the master fee schedule at the Foley Pavilion and does not assume approval of any additional events. Community Services is also proposing increased part-time staffing for supporting these existing events due to the additional facility oversight and operational support required at the pavilion that was not previously necessary for these events when they were held at the plaza. While there is currently no program revenue budgeted in association with the Foley Pavilion, staff is seeking council direction on exploring a partial cost recovery model for the use of the facility. While many of the events hosted at the pavilion are organized by valued community nonprofits, it is also important to recognize that city resources are limited, and they cannot indefinitely absorb the full operational cost of every program and event. A partial cost recovery model could provide a pathway to support continued activation and potential expansion of programming at the pavilion without requiring reductions to other community services programs or service levels. The proposed budget also incorporates an abbreviated swim season in advance of the full closure anticipated in 2027 for the school district swim center renovation project. For fiscal year 26-27, the proposed swim season would operate from July through September, and for fiscal year 27-28 from July through August. Despite the shortened operation periods, costs are not reduced proportionally due to the fixed operational requirements associated with opening and operating the facility. Additionally, the reduction in seasonal operations is fully offset by the inclusion of the school district swim center reimbursement expenses, which accounts for the city's share of operational costs during periods of city-only use, including utilities and chemical costs. Staff are seeking council feedback and direction regarding the PRO's swim center operating periods. Finally, while the proposed budget does not include funding for new capital projects or broader parks deferred maintenance, it does allocate approximately $75,000 to address deferred facility maintenance needs at the museum and the senior center. At the March 25th goal-setting meeting, Council identified several priorities and concerns, including the need for continued deferred maintenance funding and a desire to advance park development at Laurafish Summersall Park and Badger Park. Council also raised questions regarding the increasing scope and cost of community events, the future operational direction of the Foley Pavilion, and opportunities to expand park amenities such as sand volleyball courts. These discussions culminated in the adopted City Council goal to prepare a financial strategy for the Community Services Fund, including a clear framework for spending priorities. While the intention this evening is not to finalize this strategy, staff have identified several policy pathways for Council consideration in the context of the proposed budget and as foundational steps towards developing a longer-term financial strategy. In addition to the cost recovery options discussed for the Foley Pavilion, expanded cost recovery principles could be applied across multiple programs. For example, the Community Center provides spaces to organizations such as the YWCA, Corazon, and Alliance Medical, with varying levels of cost recovery ranging from no cost to near market rate. Establishing clear and consistent cost recovery targets could support a more sustainable and predictable financial model. Another option is the adoption of the Community Services Surplus Policy, similar to the policy previously adopted for the General Fund. This approach would direct one-time surplus revenues towards non-recurring expenditures such as capital improvements, deferred maintenance, or other council prioritized one-time investments, particularly in years when revenues exceed projections or expenditures come in under budget. Council may also provide direction to staff to cap program expenditures at specified dollar amounts or to reduce program budgets by a defined percentage or dollar threshold. This direction could be incorporated into the proposed budget or considered as part of the future spending priority discussions. Finally, limiting the addition of new events or scaling back existing event programming would have a direct impact on reducing overall costs. While each event plays a valued role in the community, the continued expansion of event programming without corresponding cost recovery mechanisms is not financially sustainable. I'm happy to answer any questions.
And Mayor and Council, if I could just jump in with a couple of quick thoughts on that. There's a lot here and your appetite for how much of this you want to dig into tonight is really it. We're here. We're here to support, and obviously some of this is something we'll continue to work on in the months to come. But there's two things that I think make a lot of sense as we look for how do we grab more funding for capital. And as I mentioned at the outset, at this point, whether capital means deferred maintenance or new stuff is less of an urgent question to me until there's funding to have that conversation, though I recognize that's also something that council will have to provide some guidance on. But there's a couple of things on that previous slide that I think are relatively short-term and achievable. On the issue of cost recovery, we're prepared to move pretty quickly with some options for cost recovery on events at Foley. That's not going to, seismically change a $9 million budget. But what it would do is allow us, without, as Katie said, making other cuts, say yes to more events there. And Friday being the example, it's pretty neat to see that thing activated, and we'd like to be able to do that. There's going to be some hard decisions since so many of these, almost all of the demand comes from partner nonprofits in town. And we understand their financial challenges, but we're prepared to move with some options and come back to you fairly quickly with some cost recovery. So feedback on that would be helpful. And then I think the surplus policy is an idea that makes a lot of sense. We'll not clear any money right now, but just as we do with the general fund, if at the end of a fiscal year, either because expenditures were lower than we thought or revenues were higher or some combination of the two, a policy to essentially sweep those funds and put them aside for capital needs over the long haul could be really impactful. So I think that's something again, writing a policy in the next couple of months is not going to create money, but I think it would put us on a path to being able to secure more funding in the future. So there's a lot more here, and we welcome your feedback on all of it, but I just wanted to flag a couple of things that I think are pretty achievable in the short term, which would at least start the process of being able to secure more funding for capital, because we feel the need, and I know you do too.
Okay, so before we go to questions, you did mention that we're going to have time to actually do the prioritization work on what's listed as council concerns and policy pathways and so on. But and not now. I just want to kind of just get a clear picture about that, because that is a big discussion, and I'm not sure if you need that feedback immediately or if we're going to dive into that later.
Yeah, it's a great question. It is not our intent that we will tonight develop a 5-year financial plan for the fund.
Right.
Obviously. So in that sense, many of these questions will be things that we take more time on. There's a really rich slide, 4 or 5 slides back, about the various programs and their fully burdened cost and cost recovery. You could have hundreds of great questions and thoughts about this. And it's not our expectation that we'll make major programming changes here, obviously. But when we talk about work that we'll do in the coming fiscal year on a financial strategy, that's after the adoption of this budget. So I also feel the need to kind of flag for you all that what we should be thinking about is, are there things that we want to do right now in this budget that just start in a modest way to capture some of the policy guidance that this council might want to provide. So it's a little bit of a half answer, but given that a lot of these conversations will not happen before the adoption of this budget,
You're kind of cracking open a very big door there.
Right. I want to create a little bit of space
Okay.
for us to at least start to engage with those questions, because we're going to adopt a budget and we're on target 20 some days. So there's no time like the present. And that's why I wanted to flag a couple of things that I think, and even a reserve policy, for instance, there's no reason that has to happen before the budget is adopted, but it is something that we could start working on pretty much right away. So I wanted to give you that opportunity.
What's the timeline for us doing that deeper dive in community services budget? Are we talking 1 month, 2 months, 6 months?
Do you mean when we would start it or how long it would take?
No, when we'd start it.
I don't think we have to find a particular schedule. I think I would suggest we take a breath after we adopt the budget. We'll be will be dark in July, and I can think, I would think any time after that.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Councilmember Higley.
Yeah, again, this is, there's a lot here that, we could discuss that. I'm actually looking forward to the discussion on, the totality of everything within community services and, senior center and where the money's going. But I do like the idea tonight of the surplus policy for capital needs. I like that. I think that get that in, right now so that, if revenues suddenly go up. I mean, we have expressed over and over how capital improvements are, really, and the maintenance and everything is really crucial because it starts to deteriorate. So I like that suggestion. So thank you for that. I would support that. And then I would support, some kind of a pilot program. Related to cost recovery, so that we have something that we can kind of start, but throw that pilot program label on it. So that we can start to, kind of come up with the framework. I think with the Foley Pavilion, it's barely been open. We have, we're still new hotels opening. There's still a lot moving around. I think where we're lucky compared to a lot of other cities is we're looking at the puddles that we don't want to step in. Well, the other cities are knee deep in those puddles going, how do I get dry? And so I think there's a lot that is, I don't want to say exciting because it's not going to be exciting to go through this process, but it's very healthy for us as a city to have these discussions in the next year, on the, where the priorities should be and with our funding. But for those two things, I would support in, coming back with some suggestions on the surplus policy for capital needs, and then the support, and I would support the cost recovery, some kind of a pilot program or suggestion, as with the understanding it'll like move as we move forward.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I also would support the cost recovery. I think right now, since Foley Pavilion is brand new, that and there's a lot of interest in having events there now, I believe, which we kind of thought was going to happen, that now's the time to come up with that cost recovery framework at least, so that we don't get too far down the road and have the expectations be we're going to support all these things and now all of a sudden we're not. I think that's kind of where we are now to some degree. So I do think that, especially for Foley Pavilion, which is going to be where most of the events probably will be taking place from now on. So I would definitely support that. The surplus policy, yes. I would also support that. But I have a hard time, I have to say, supporting a budget that has nothing in it for deferred maintenance or capital. I think that we need to think about how to find some funds for that now, down the road. These are all the assets that we're using, and if we're not going to take care of them, but we're just going to continue to use them, it's going to be a problem, I think. So whether it's scale back on how much we do in the events, maybe not be so grand, maybe do all the same events, but cut back on some of the ways that we produce those. I think that that's something that we need to consider for this budget. I think this budget for me, it's a problem having nothing in there, or like a line you can't even really see on the chart for deferred maintenance.
Okay, thanks, Mayor.
Yeah, I want to echo the Foley. I like it's actually a premium location. And when we're looking at that, to really work on getting our nonprofits on that year ahead schedule, so that we know that where there might be slots where we can actually generate income from it, because I don't want to see the Foley cost as much as the community center percentage wise. I think that it's an opportunity that it can actually contribute to its operations and everything we can. And my concern I have is that as we see these great events happening, that people keep wanting to do better, more and more and more, and that puts pressure on our staff of overtime and so forth. So I'm really concerned about that cost recovery, not for the time of the event, but how long it takes to clean up and set up, that we really focus on those going forward.
Okay, believe Councilmember Kelly's sent the
Okay.
question to Councilmember Higley. Thanks for your
Yeah,
help.
this is Councilmember Kelly. I would suggest we adopt a surplus policy for capital and maintenance. And then follow it up with, I definitely want to see us develop a cost recovery strategy for the Foley Pavilion.
Okay. And I would agree with that also. I think we, you know, as soon as we can develop that cost recovery on the Foley Pavilion and maybe other places, the better. I had a conversation with Steve DeVeres from Healdsburg Wine and Food Experience recently, and you know, about moving to Foley, and he's going to make time after their event, which is this weekend, I think. And I invited him to go to the farmers market and see it in action. So, because like a lot of users, sort of hesitant to make the move, I'm going to sell it, and he's going to love it, I think. But that's a really prime example of the type of event that we could be using to help our bottom line here, and I'm sure there could be many others. So you know, as soon as we can get some numbers out in front of him and others, the better we are able to improve on the spreadsheet. And definitely the maintenance, deferred maintenance. You know, I know at the Parks Commission level and at council, there's been a lot of research into what that maintenance is and needs to be and looks like. And so we have a lot of tools to work from, but at this point, we're not putting any money on the table there. So that's a great position to be in. Before, we didn't have that. And so, you know, we're ready to make things happen in the right way and do it wisely, but we need to figure out how to get some money in front of us so we can actually do that. But it really is critically important that we keep up on things. If we're going to continue this appetite to improve, which I think we should, but that kind of does come first. I had a question about the Parks and Trails section here, which maybe go to Director Thimick. I'm curious what sort of increases we've seen and of what type since we've taken on Fitch Mountain and the Ridge, which are both fairly recent, you know, in the development of our parks situation. I can just get a quick glimpse on that. And also your take on how economical it is to be working with contractors on a lot of parks maintenance stuff. I mean, I assume that's why we do that, and as we have contractors to do some of the basic facilities maintenance, mowing the lawns and so on. But is that something that deserves some more scrutiny?
So let's answer the first question about open space. Most of our management of open spaces has been done in a partnership with LandPass. Their capacity is fluctuated based on their needs and their open spaces year over year. It is definitely an area where we're probably not fulfilling our entire obligation to the management plan, but we're working on it over time. Thanks to our friends in the fire department, they have done a huge amount of the stewardship work in terms of fire fuel reduction and things like that that are identified in that. So in partnership with the fire department, I think we're doing a lot. We're doing road repairs on Fitch Mountain to address the erosion. You might remember that. We're continuing that work. And so we're making progress. We did just bring a part-time staff person on board in open space to help us kind of address some of the use issues, particularly dogs off leash and some of the things that are happening there. So I think we're doing an okay job managing it.
What do you call that position? I remember we had something like that a few years ago, but
it's basically it's a recreation assistant level within the city structure. It's a part-time position who's going to be on site, kind of doing natural resource stewardship, working with LandPass,
and talking to users.
And talking to users, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Park service officers, what we've used in the past, those kinds of things. So,
Okay.
so we're doing work there. We could always do more, but I think we're okay. And a lot of that's thanks to our friends in the fire department. To answer your second question in relation to contracted services, our contracted mowers are mow and go. If you ever see them out there, they are moving and they do that work and they do it well every day and they have the equipment to do it. And it's a really, I believe, an economical way to deliver all the mowing needs that happen, particularly in the wintertime when it's, you know, rainy and wetter out. We've not done a detailed analysis on that, but I think if you factored in additional staffing requirements, the equipment that you need, not only the mowers, but the trailers to haul them around and those kinds of things. We have a limited number of that to do like high weed mowing and things like that. My gut feeling is it's a good return on the investment because they do that work and they do it fast and they're in and out.
Okay, thank you. And yeah,
Well, you're up there. I think it's important for us and the community to understand. So I'm looking at special events, $919,000 is the expense, revenue's 80 grand, so net cost is 839. And immediately, you know, we think, well, shoot, maybe the holiday tree doesn't need to be 45 feet tall, maybe it's 30 feet tall. Or we don't need the fairies on stilts. But those are in the context of what goes into the $919,000 for an event like that. I'm assuming a lot of it is the behind the scenes things that we don't see. So I guess my question is, where would you see ability to still put on the great events, but where would you see maybe some savings or cutbacks that, you know, so it's not a Charlie Brown Christmas tree and, you know, in the gazebo and, you know, me singing or something.
Sure.
Like
Sure.
where does your mind go if it was like, all right, we have to cut X amount, like,
Yeah. So I don't know if we have this. I don't think we have it handy, but you know, in terms of the special events budget itself, maybe you could pull that number without the fully burdened costs if we have it handy. Special events encompasses a lot of the full-time staff team. And so when I looked at the allocation of staffing, for example, there's 15% of our Parks and Open Space superintendent's salary allocated to special events. Why is that? Well, he oversees all the holiday decor that happens in the downtown area. And that's significantly labor intensive multiple times a year. And so as you look at special events, that number's big because it includes a pretty good, not a good portion, but a portion of mine, a bit of Superintendent Lycia, certainly Mr. Mildy, our facilities and events supervisor, our facilities attendant, Sal, who does all the setup work for the events, and then a ton of part-time staff. So I did propose different reductions that are easy to target. We could drop the tree from 50 feet to 20 feet, and it would be a $5,000 tree instead of a $30,000 tree. But the effect of that will be a 20-foot tree, similar to what you might have seen in front of the Foley Pavilion this winter. The fireworks, it's a $60,000 cost to the city. When you factor in not staffing costs, but that's just the direct costs that we pay. So there's things that we can do. We can reduce the Tuesday concert series. Maybe it doesn't need to run the whole summer. It could start when school gets out and when it resumes. That's a savings of probably $20,000. And so there are pieces that we could do to reduce costs, but they would have an impact on the overall development of that event. The other piece I want to add is we've added a lot of events. City Council has added numerous events, which included financial sponsorship, Gala Getza, and Pride Festival. And so those add up over time. But they're great events. And I think it's one of the things that makes Healdsburg pretty special. And when you look at kind of this whole picture, so I've been in this work for 10 years here. I wasn't here when they passed the ballot measure, but what I've heard is that They wanted these dollars to go back and then be invested in the community. And I think we're doing it in a really wide variety of ways. If you're a senior, you get some great services. If you like to go to events, you get some pretty cool events. If you want to go out and recreate or use our open spaces, we're one of the only cities of 12,000 that have 375 acres of open space. So I think we can look at things and where those investments should go. But overall, as a whole, these are great investments for the community.
Okay, that's very helpful. I appreciate the context because it is kind of tip of the iceberg is what everybody sees and experience, but we all see and recognize our city staff and see the behind the scenes, and I think that's where it's like, okay, it's going to be a big lift on some of these, senior services, and a lot of these I think are going to be where it's harder to get some cost recovery, but I'm looking forward to that discussion.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I do think the Foley Pavilion has potential, and we should look at that. But you look at Friday's event, unfortunately I was out of town, but the number of hours that our team spent preparing for that was significant.
Yeah.
The return on that investment was pretty cool from the pictures I saw, so.
Thank you.
Also, when we're looking at the senior services, that's not including the grant money for when the time comes, correct? Because we haven't received that. Is that calculated in here?
It is, Mayor, members of council, it is for this current fiscal year and our estimate to close. And they are actively working on kind of formalizing the funding for the upcoming 2 fiscal years. So that will be added through a budget amendment at some point in the near
Okay,
future.
so it'll come down a little bit then.
Senior services, I'm wondering, have you guys looked or discussed like cost recovery for non-residents? Because the senior center serves any senior no matter where they live, but a lot of the seniors don't live in Healdsburg, but because they have such a good reputation of doing great programming, people come from Windsor, Cloverdale, Santa Rosa, and they're participating in our programming. Do we ever like have conversations about the free programming or the reduced price programming only being for Healdsburg residents because it's being paid for with their tax dollars? That's a local base. Technically, it's our visitors' tax dollars, but you know what I mean?
I know. It's a really good question. We don't differentiate between residents and non-residents. And we serve, as you know, a geographic area that's much wider than our city limits, our school district in Geyserville. And so we don't differentiate between resident or non-resident for any programs. It's certainly something we could look at. I think it would potentially come with disadvantages, particularly for some of the families that may not live within the city limits, but within the school district. And it can be done. We don't. And that's never been discussed yet.
For the ACEs program, I know a while back the Boys and Girls Club had expressed that they run ACEs programs in almost all of the other cities where they have a club. And now that they're building their beautiful new clubhouse, I'm sure, are going to be interested in having that conversation again about whether the ACEs program could be housed within the Boys and Girls Club and having a partner agency deliver it instead of city staff at a school site and the logistics involved in that. Is that something you guys are talking about?
It is actually. There's a couple aspects to it. One, we currently do the Club H program, the junior high program at the junior high, and it has challenges. It's a junior high age clientele, and not all the teachers like to have the after school program there. And so that is one of the areas that definitely we could look at that. I think when we come back to you with the bigger kind of service priorities, this will be a discussion. The ACEs program is very important to our team because we connect with so many of the families in the city in terms of kind of continuity of services. They're in ACEs and then they come to the summer camp program. And so there's this continuity of services. The other piece that's happened in the past couple of years is the way the state funds the ACEs program and their ELOP, extended learning opportunities. Any any student in the school district now can attend summer camp for free if they're in the Healdsburg School District, and it's funded through the ELOT program through the school district. And so there are like benefits, I think, to the city and the community that we are connected to the ACES program. But I also recognize when you look at the fully burdened costs, we commit a lot of staff resources to it as well. So to answer your question, I think there's opportunity definitely in Club H. As far as the broader ACES program, we haven't had that conversation with the school district or with the Boys and Girls Club yet. But it's on the list.
I think that will be interesting to look at that. And I am interested in seeing if there's any possible recovery of the senior center from out of town folks. It kind of opens up a broader question about some of the things we spend a lot of money on that are really enjoyed by folks outside of Healdsburg. And I don't really think there's much we can do about it. Certainly the fireworks is a great example of lots of people come in to enjoy that. And, you know, it's fun to welcome our friends from out of town. The Christmas thing is another example of a lot of people coming into town to enjoy our holiday celebration. There, you know, I wonder if we could be more creative, and at least in terms of people shopping and eating and doing things, spending some money while they're here doing that. And it probably is. I know people are spending some money, but maybe they could spend more. Maybe that could be a focus so we can at least see a little sales tax revenue on, you know, as part of the benefits of having that. You know,
Can I address the
Mhm.
Mary Healdsburg event? The HDID does pay most of the cost for the Christmas tree. Plaza tree, whatever you want to call it. And what we've heard from businesses is that night, all the businesses in town are exceptionally busy, and people continue to come to town because of the overall decor and kind of that reputation that Healdsburg has. So I think there is a return on that investment as well.
Yeah, good.
I don't know how you
No, that's perfect. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for filling that in. Yeah, go ahead.
Kind of shifting gears, the swim center operation. So just getting back to this, so it looks like you're proposing for this year, July through September, is 157,000, and then next in 27, it'd be July through August is 79,000. So that last month is, well, I guess per month, I guess it's about right. But so you're proposing it would. The swim season would only be for 2 months.
Correct. In 2027, the school district thought they were going to start construction at the end of the high school swim team season in 2027. But because of the timeline that takes to get through the state architect's office, they're looking right now at the end of the summer season. It probably doesn't make a lot of sense for the city to run like a June program only, because school gets out the second week of June and we'd staff up and we'd have a lot of resources that we'd have to invest in. So they're looking at the starting the construction in the fall of 2027.
So yeah, I was curious why it was shortened, but that makes sense because they are going to do improvements. Okay.
And we will be coming forward there. You know, there'll need to be a conversation between the city and the school district about the future operation of this facility. We have not seen the renderings yet or the concept plans. We should get that pretty soon. And so what is the city's obligation? And I know we're conscious of that and we're kind of keeping that in our back pocket. Like that needs to be figured out as we move ahead. And that'll come to council at some point my guess is in the next 6 to 12 months, maybe, perhaps, something like that.
Okay. Go ahead.
So we've all agreed on the cost recovery and surplus policy. Some of the other two recommendations it sounds like you've kind of suggested that trying to cap or limit the events may not work very well. But I still think we ought to consider at least talking about capping the costs for future, considering the fact that this budget still doesn't have anything in for deferred maintenance or capital projects. And we've got a lot of things in our parks that need to get fixed. People are going to get mad about that before too long. So I want to go back to that because we're not really talking about that, but I wanted to see if any council kind of agrees with that or thinks that's a way some direction that we should be giving here.
I mean, I think we need to be looking at a figure for, bare bones, minimal maintenance, and knowing that we can do a lot more, but at the same time, that'll give us a better idea of what kind of target we need in terms of reducing costs to meet that. But it is really important. We can't just be put on the shelf. So if that figure was just, off the top of my head, it was $1 million, then we'd have to find that $1 million somewhere within the community services budget to cover that. And I mean, I think it's that important. That being said, we're doing this in a position of some financial distress where the incomes are down, and this is sort of a place where we're having opportunity to find out where those minimums are and establish that baseline, with the hope that we'll continue to grow the programs and do development like we have been doing. But for the time being, it's really important to see that this window where budget is tight as a way to kind of get a clear idea of what those numbers are. And I don't think we have that in front of us right now. Director Edgars, do we have anything along those lines in terms of a maintenance target or?
In terms of deferred maintenance? No, the target could be whatever we want. We have a facilities assessment that was from 2020.
It was completed in like 2018, 2019.
And that had identified over, I think, $16 million in deferred maintenance that needed to happen. So I mean, we could chip away that $200,000 a year. We could go for 500,000. It's really up to council's direction.
I just kind of want to have an idea of what amount of work we need to do that would really be the basic level. I mean, I think we can do a lot of things to improve facilities for sure, and that figure you mentioned covers everything, and it's probably somewhat ambitious.
So let me go back to the first question that Councilmember Mitchell asked. We're not proposing to add any more events. We are maxed out in terms of our staffing resources, our financial commitment, with the exception of the Foley Pavilion. What I hear tonight is definitely explore a cost recovery model. That'll help support our part-time. We're not requesting full-time staff, so we are not talking about doing weddings and a lot more there, because we can't add more big events that would require that. There's other ways you could go about that. We have a very successful relationship with Milestone, and so that's something that we'll look at in terms of like, if there are private events that want to be hosted there that are more wedding, upscale kinds of events, there may be a different model we could use. And that's certainly something we'd bring back to City Council. I also don't want to lose track that we are doing deferred maintenance. We are spending $250,000 on a new roof at the community center this fiscal year. That work is done. We spent $250,000 at the library last year for ADA improvements. We did a long list of work the year before. And so we do have a good track record. And it's not that difficult to identify some projects and figure out how we might be able to add that in if that's council's direction for the upcoming year, which sounds like. The other piece too is like, give yourself some credit. We've completed about we have completed or in progress $25 million in capital improvement projects, from the Foley Pavilion to the Fitch Mountain open space access improvements to Laurafish Somersault Park and Badger Park. And so there's a lot of work that the city has done over the past few years and will do in the next year that you should take credit for as well.
Thank you.
But which we want to maintain.
Absolutely.
So that's where I keep coming back to that concern with the current budgets that we've got projected here. And I think I would like to see us direct that we cap it, do something to address that issue within the next 2 years budget. We're talking 2-year budget here. So it's not like, I just think we can't kick the can down the road any more than we already have. So I'm not sure exactly what the direction should be. I mean, I do think the cost recovery and the surplus policy will address those issues going forward, but not in the next 2 years, because we're not projecting a surplus for sure. But capping, even if it's just capping the cost to whatever last year was on the events, the cost that we can cap. I understand we can't cap the salaries and so on. You know, those are not discretionary, but I just really would like to see us do that.
I think another way that, into the mayor's question about, what amount would we like to do, it's hard. Obviously, I don't know if we can give you one number. Some of these projects are very expensive and we could burn through a lot on one project. Other things, maybe there are lots of more cheap things, but they take a ton of staff time. So it kind of depends. But I think what Director Themig just said is a pretty interesting mile marker, right? The last couple of years, you were able to name a couple $250,000 projects that we completed. And in the upcoming 2-year budget, we've got 65,000 combined over 2 years. So there's a little context in my mind that frames something that would be a nice to have target. Now, what would it mean to clear 250? I'm not sure, honestly, but if the council wanted to give us a target, it's something we could work on. My gut says that's kind of at the outer bound of what we could find without having to come back to you with service cuts that I don't think any of us are going to like. I'm not even sure we could pull that off without, some things that maybe we just don't want to accept right now in terms of cuts. But, to me, if it's helpful, I think that's kind of the outer bound of what we could find, and maybe it's not even possible. But if up to that or something less than that, if the council wanted us to take a whack at it, we could, try to come back to you next time with some amount carved out for deferred maintenance.
Yeah,
I
think
would
that would be
certainly
helpful.
support that. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, if it's $250,000 is what you're saying, maybe should be a target, and then come back with that or something as close to that as you can get.
Yeah. I'm truly, I don't know until we do this exercise. It just, my gut says that's kind of the extreme of, and I truly don't know that we could pull that off. We might come back to you and say we did our best and here's what we think we can do.
That would be great. I mean, like I said,
We
right
should
now
try it.
it's hard to discuss this until we have a little bit more meat on the bones. And so yeah, if we can get to that, that'd be helpful for sure. Vice Mayor.
And I don't want to lose the fact when you mentioned that maybe shortening the Tuesday on the plazas to the school, when school is out, when school starts, if we could get an idea of what each of those individual events would cost in the future. Be really nice to know, shortening that maybe just a little bit, because we do have, the Tienga has music, we have lots of events that do have music, and maybe shortening that a little bit would allow us to kick a little towards deferred maintenance.
I have that number, if you give me a second.
Didn't want to put you on this.
It was a nominal amount. It wasn't a huge amount. And I do think the impact, people are calling us every day. What's the lineup? When are you starting? What's the lineup? When are you starting? Let me see if I can pull this up here really quick.
And could I just add one thing while you're looking that up about the HTID monies? While they have supported these events year upon year, I don't know that we can always count on that, because I think they're restructuring a little bit, and I'm on that grant committee and I hear some of the conversations, and it's not always clear that these are the things they're going to fund. So anyway, I just think it's a cautionary point here.
Yep, that's been the direction in the last couple of years. So, hold on just a moment. Were you finished with your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
And my apologies, my spreadsheet's not coming up with that info, but
Just something so that when we have the deeper discussion, it would be something we could.
absolutely.
So I kind of motion to, okay. That's
All
what's
right,
going
I've
on.
got one
Okay,
here.
you got
Okay.
it. Thanks.
Now that we have an annual event schedule plan, thanks in great part to the excellent work of Director Themig and his team, I would really like to have a better sense of what the cost per event is. And based on those partnership levels from the city, could we nudge our nonprofit partners to seek sponsorships or grants on their own to help offset the event costs? Second one is, yes, would like to see a carve out of $250,000 or more for deferred maintenance. And then I'll just read them all. We used to have summer concert series sponsorships. I'm wondering if we are still actively seeking those sponsorships.
To answer your question, yes, we actively seek them. The typical donors are still donating. Big John's is a sponsor and some other groups like that. So we do continue to seek those sponsors.
I just wanted to make clear to the folks at home that those questions that Councilmember Higley just read were from Councilmember Kelly. So sorry if it's confusing, but I think it's worth making clear. So, but thank you.
Yes.
Do we have any other? Okay. All right. Yeah. All right. So here's another one from Councilmember Kelly, read by Councilmember Higley.
First question Agley read about asking if we can find out an event cost per event and ask our nonprofit partners, like you set up those partnership levels of how much city support each event gets.
Mhm.
And I would imagine that the more support they get, the more expensive it is for the city. Like if we are co-producing the event like we do for Day of the Dead versus, I don't know, what's another level? I forget the names that you gave them. Like the lowest level of city partnership is cheaper for us and more expensive for them.
Correct. There's only a few that we are heavily invested in financially, and those are typically our signature events now that are held in the plaza. So Mary Healdsburg, Dia de Muertos, 4th of July, although Rotary does most of the direct costs. I do think we could come up with that information. It may take us some work to do because it'll consist of salaries plus whatever direct costs we actually contribute to the events.
And is there like a conversation that could be had where we, over time, since we have a cap and we have an annual event calendar, that we can say to partners, like, this event is successful and we'd like to see you go out and seek support for it from other channels, other grants, other sponsorships to help make it more financially sustainable for the nonprofits?
We can do that. I'm just trying to think of the best. Probably when we do the more detailed analysis, we can pull that information together then. A lot of times the event organizers are working on just typically how we structure is we typically take care of like the logistics, so the stuff on the ground. Restrooms come through our franchise agreement with Recology. Our part-time staff help staff the event. You know, Matt Mildy does the coordination of it as a full-time staff person. And again, I think there's only a few where we make a sizable financial contribution to the actual event cost. I think it's relatively small, but that's something we can bring back.
How are we soliciting sponsorships for summer concerts?
So it's happening right now. It's on the city's website. We've had transition of part-time staff, so we have a new person who's actually working on that right now. They do direct outreach to prior sponsors. I've already heard from a couple of them. They're like, "Oh yeah, we're sponsoring," and so that process is underway right now.
And how much revenue does that bring in for sponsorships typically?
Just 1 second.
And you could always answer it later. I'm just
I think
curious if
this
it
one I
like
might have.
does
Let me
much to
see.
offset it.
Just give me 1 second. About $50,000 in total, but for Tuesday concerts, 20,000 is what our target is, at least for this upcoming fiscal year.
We're wondering what the noise is in the city hall here. It's
We have a woodpecker.
something clicking up in the corner. Okay. Do we have any other questions for Director Demig or Edgar on community services? And do you have enough direction?
I want to make sure I heard, but what I heard is let's see if we can get up to 250,000 for deferred maintenance in this next budget. And we will obviously come back to you with what probably will be a menu of options as part of the budget adoption discussion. We'll get as close as we can and we'll bring you some options for consideration if that sounds right.
And the support
Yes.
policy for capital needs, the surplus policy, and then cost recovery. I think we talked about some kind of program or starting?
Correct, and we'll start with our focus, as you've heard, on Foley, so that we can get something in place pretty fast.
Okay, anything else to add or subtract?
No, that sounds.
Good. That's thumbs up. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to take a 10-minute break. We will reconvene at 8:25. Hello. Welcome back, everybody. Okay, we're gonna move on to the streets fund. Am I right? Yep.
Alrighty. So the streets operating fund is supported by multiple revenue sources, two of which are restricted for streets operating and maintenance. Go Sonoma sales tax revenue is an extension of the previously approved Measure M sales tax. It is a quarter-cent tax on all taxable retail sales throughout Sonoma County. The city's allocation is anticipated to be approximately $240,000 per year, and these funds are received directly into the streets operating fund. Gas tax revenues are received first in the Gas Tax Special Revenue Fund and then transferred into the Streets Operating Fund to support annual maintenance activities. Annual gas tax revenues are projected at approximately $340,000 per year, with the proposed transfers utilizing all anticipated available funding, including fund balance from previous years. In addition, the general fund contribution, approximately $190,000 a year, supports streetlight operations, which provide a citywide benefit. A small amount of additional revenue is generated through developer fees and reimbursement for staff time that is charged to developer-funded projects, which helps offset the operating costs. However, the bulk of historical funding for the Streets Operating Fund has been supported by Measure T transfers. As part of the effort to redirect Measure T funding to address the current general fund deficit, proposed Measure T transfers have been reduced in the first year, with Streets Operating Fund instead relying on available fund balance to bridge the gap. Proposed expenses total $1.4 million in fiscal year 26-27 and increase to $1.5 million in fiscal year 27-28. As noted in the general fund review, staffing costs have been reallocated so that wages and benefits in the streets fund now reflect maintenance and engineering staff who directly support streets operations. These staff are responsible for identifying, planning, and completing streets repairs and maintenance activities. Staff whose primary responsibilities relate to development projects, including those with impacts on streets, have been moved to the Public Works Department in the general fund. These costs are supported by engineering and inspection fee revenues and are not consistent with the restricted funding sources that support the streets fund operations. As I mentioned, the fiscal year 26-27 proposed budget relies on approximately $500,000 of available fund balance anticipated at the end of the current fiscal year. The fiscal year 27-28 proposed budget, by contrast, reflects a balanced operating budget supported by approximately $640,000 in Measure T transfers, which is more reflective of the ongoing annual operating funding that is required. Despite the constraints on street operating revenue, the council has prioritized streets capital improvements. The proposed 5-year capital improvement program for the Streets Fund, including projects currently underway that will carry into the upcoming budget cycle, totals $61.5 million. The program includes 6 new projects, as well as additional funding for 3 ongoing projects in the biennial budget cycle. The robust Streets Capital Improvement Program leverages significant grant funding in the current fiscal year and a diversified mix of utility funding supporting underground infrastructure replacements as components of the larger streets projects to increase efficiency in the proposed budget cycle. In the first year, the majority of the $2.8 million in funding is restricted for the specific project uses as it's tied to those utility components, except for the $837,000 in unrestricted Measure T funding allocated for the Grove Street Neighborhood Implementation Plan project. In fiscal year 27-28, of the $4.3 million proposed, the $528,000 in unrestricted Measure T funding is allocated across 3 projects: Ward Street Neighborhood Revitalization, Sunset Drive Slope Stabilization and Pavement Repair, and Front Street and First Street Rehabilitation Project. I would like to note that this slide has been updated from the agenda packet materials to correct a misalignment in the project funding. Ultimately, between the Streets Operating Fund and the Streets Capital Fund, staff are proposing sufficient funding to support general operating maintenance, including streetlights, pothole, and signage replacements, as well as $7.1 million in capital projects. However, there are many more capital projects that continue to be deferred due to funding constraints, and staff welcome council's feedback on the proposed prioritization of capital projects.
Okay, thank you. Who'd like to go first? Nope. No. No questions on this one? No? Okay. Right.
All right, transitioning into the enterprise funds. First up is the water fund. Total revenues in the water fund are proposed at $9.7 million in fiscal year 26-27 and $10.2 million in 27-28. The revenue growth is reflective of the ordinance adopted by council in May 2024, which included a series of rate increases culminating with the 13% increase effective July 1st, 2026. The significant increases identified in the last cost of service study were driven primarily by declining water sales due to conservation efforts and the accumulation of deferred critical infrastructure investments. Although water usage increased by approximately 9% year over year in fiscal year 24-25, throughout the third quarter of fiscal year 25-26, the current fiscal year 25-26, usage has declined by approximately 8%, so almost returning back to the fiscal year 23-24 levels. To maintain progress on the critical infrastructure investments proposed in tonight's 5-year capital improvement plan, the city will need to continue proactively completing rate studies and implementing future rate adjustments. While the future increases are anticipated to be significantly lower than this past rate study, staff have projected revenues assuming an estimated 5% increase for fiscal year 27-28. This estimate is intended solely as a placeholder at this time, with the actual rate adjustment to be determined through the rate setting process proposed to be launched in fiscal year 26-27. Total expenses proposed for fiscal year 26-27 are $11.1 million, decreasing to $10 million in fiscal year 27-28. In the first year, $3.8 million is allocated to support capital projects, followed by $2.8 million in the second year. Operating costs are proposed at $7.3 million in the first year and $7.2 million in the second year. Bringing it all together, the fund balance at the end of the biennial budget cycle is projected to be $3.8 million. The proposed budget maintains both the operating reserve target of 25% of operating expenses and the rate stabilization reserve target of $1 million. It should be noted that these projections reflect that 5% rate increase that has not yet been adopted. As a result, the fund balance projections and these related charts are expected to change as the budget cycle progresses and the rate setting process is completed. The proposed 5-year capital improvement program for the water fund, including projects currently underway, totals $23.2 million. The program includes 8 new projects, as well as additional funding for 3 ongoing projects in the biennial budget cycle. In the first year, the proposed water capital improvement program totals $4.3 million, followed by $2.8 million in the second year. 2 projects include both water and wastewater components, and the chart presented reflects the corresponding funding sources for each. While operations have remained largely consistent year over year, the proposed budget includes a one-time contracted services expense and an ongoing software subscription to implement utility billing enhancements. These improvements have been a long-standing goal, but have been constrained by available funding. Staff are proposing a new online customer portal to streamline access to daily usage data and payment services, improving transparency and supporting ongoing conservation efforts required by state legislation. The proposed budget also includes funding to complete a cost of service study and update the water impact fee study. In response to continued water supply sustainability concerns, it further includes $1.5 million to increase production capacity at the Dry Creek wells through rehabilitation of 3 of the 5 existing wells. However, no funding is included for construction of new wells. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, who'd like to go first? Dave.
I just had a question. When I never got one of the flume devices back during the drought, and then just started looking at automating everything. Went back and they're sold out or not available. And Do we have any funding available in here if we wanted to do another program to kind of get another batch of those out into the community? Because I feel like it would tie in really well with some of the software and billing updates, because I feel like that was what people really like, to be able to track how much water or get notified if they're using too much. And just based on your report on the a couple months ago about the revenue from a lot of people that use a lot of water, I think that would be a good thing to kind of get back out there. And it seems like it'd be a fairly low cost thing. I mean, I'm looking online, they're like $260. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
So I believe the Flume devices are able to add a little bit more detailed data in terms of what in your house is using those costs because they're behind the meter. However, our utility billing enhancement project would provide a high level data that could provide some of the same information. So it would capture the utility billing reads, and it would, at this time, we believe we would be able to provide daily reads for each customer's water use as well as electricity use. And that would also include alerts for if they have continued usage, which would indicate a leak. They can also customize it to give themselves alerts if their bill, for example, exceeds a certain dollar amount, if their water usage exceeds a certain gallons per day. It is very customizable in terms of the customer's portal and what they want to be alerted for. But our real goal in this enhancement is to be able to provide that data without the additional external devices. Although those devices will always be able to provide more specific because you can connect them to your smart technologies.
I like what you're proposing way better than a Flume device. I think everything you described is, because I know during the drought, I had a leak that I wasn't aware of. And, staff is able to kind of look, because you could call at the time and they go, oh yeah, you've got, this spike. And if that's what it's doing, then that serves the purpose. Thank you.
With this new software, would you still be able to receive a hard copy, or if you get that enhanced data, you have to give up the hard copy?
No, you can absolutely still get mailed utility bills. It would be completely optional. All of your utility bills would still be available online if you wanted to register an account, but it is not mutually exclusive. You could still get mailed bills and still see your access to data online.
Great, thank you.
Okay. These priorities, are they pretty much in sync with the capital improvement sort of priorities that we looked at when we looked at the water rates over a year ago, whenever that was?
Absolutely. There's been a little bit of timing shifts in terms of making sure the order is still in kind of supporting the locations around the city. We've made a couple timing shifts, but the programs and projects that are proposed are all consistent with that 10-year financial plan that was completed during the rate study, which is why it's very important that we continue doing those rate studies, because we're expanding our look out from just the 5 years to 10 years, which really helps us do that kind of long-term planning.
All right, thank you. More questions? All right, move on to wastewater, please.
So moving on to the wastewater fund, total revenues in the wastewater fund are proposed at $12.4 million in fiscal year 26-27, increasing to $13 million in fiscal year 27-28. As with the water fund, revenue growth in the wastewater fund is reflective of the ordinance adopted by council on May 24, which included a 15% increase effective July 1st, 2026. Staff have similarly included an estimated 5% rate increase for fiscal year 27-28 as a placeholder, with the actual rate adjustment to be determined through the rate setting process proposed to begin in fiscal year 26-27. Total expenses proposed for the fiscal year 26-27 are $13.2 million, increasing to $13.4 million in the second year. In the first year, $3.2 million is allocated to support capital projects, followed by $3.3 million in the second year. Operating costs are proposed at $10 million each fiscal year. The fund balance at the end of fiscal year 27-28 is projected to be $4.6 million. The proposed budget maintains both operating reserve target of 25% of operating expenses and the rate stabilization reserve target of $1 million. Again, it should be noted that these projections reflect a 5% rate increase that has not been adopted. Before moving on, it should also be noted that in both fiscal years, total expenses exceed total revenues, primarily due to the continued investment required in wastewater infrastructure. The consistent and proactive completion of rate studies will be critical to sustaining this significant progress being made towards these infrastructure improvements. The proposed 5-year capital improvement program for the wastewater fund totals $16.5 million. The program includes 6 new projects, as well as additional funding for 1 ongoing project in the proposed biennial budget cycle. In the first year, the proposed wastewater capital improvement program totals $4.3 million, followed by $3.4 million in the second year. Several projects in fiscal year 26-27 will incorporate both water and wastewater funding, as well as water, wastewater, and drainage impact fee funding, as the projects touch on components of each of these utilities. The proposed budget includes the wastewater fund share of utility billing enhancement costs, as well as funding in fiscal year 26-27 for the cost of service study and a wastewater impact fee study. In addition, while several capital improvement projects are proposed, $1.6 million is allocated to initiate inflow and infiltration investigation and repair. This amount represents an initial estimate and is expected to lead to the identification of additional work needed to further reduce inflow and infiltration. Excess uncontrolled inflow and infiltration can cause the wastewater treatment plant to exceed its processing capacity, potentially requiring the release of untreated wastewater. Although the city has not experienced events of this magnitude, inflow and infiltration rates remain elevated, making continued mitigation efforts important to maintaining the current S&P rating of the wastewater fund. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have on the wastewater operating.
Do you have any questions on this section? Yes.
So I just wanted to ask about the debt service coverage that we've got. So in the S&P, I guess that's related to that. How far out is our debt going at this point? Is it several different bonds that we're paying on, or?
You're really testing my memory here. We definitely have the major, we have one large wastewater bond. I think the balance is still about $19 million. I don't know how many years we have on it. If I had to guess, I'd say more than 10. We are projected to meet and exceed our debt coverage ratios. That is the one very good kind of a benefit, 2 birds, 1 stone. If you're completing enough capital projects each year, you have that additional funding. That means you have enough money to support your operating reserve debt coverage, I should say, ratio. And then, I'm sorry, what was the second half of the question?
Just what was how long was the debt and what was it for? So I think you've answered it. Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll go on to the next section.
Moving on to the drainage fund, utility rate revenue reflects the flat rate of $7.58 per residential customer and 65 cents per 100 square foot of impervious surface for commercial customers. Revenues in the drainage fund are projected to total $780,000 each year. Operating expenses proposed in the drainage fund total $930,000 in fiscal year 26-27 and increased to $1 million in fiscal year 27-28. The increase is primarily driven by rising staffing costs, along with additional $50,000 in the second year to support implementation of the new MS4 permit, which is anticipated to be approved by the State Water Board in August 2027. The drainage fund is currently operating in a deficit, as ongoing revenues have not been sufficient to support annual operating expenses. When one-time funding has been available, Council has prudently directed those resources to the drainage fund to help maintain solvency. The current proposed budget does not include any allocations from the general fund or Measure T to support ongoing operations. As a result, the fund is projected to end fiscal year 27-28 with a negative working capital of approximately $460,000. The proposed 5-year capital improvement program for the Drainage Fund totals $3 million. The program includes 6 new projects proposed to be funded in the biennial budget cycle, totaling $700,000. The primary funding source for the proposed drainage projects is Measure T, with the Drainage Impact Fee Fund also contributing to one project. While ongoing operating funding remains a concern, the proposed budget does utilize the unrestricted Measure T revenue to complete important capital projects addressing flood prevention and deferred maintenance. Due to the increased general fund reliance on Measure T, 2 requested projects were deferred beyond the proposed biennial budget. I'm happy to answer any questions you have regarding the Drainage Fund.
Any questions?
So if we have negative working capital, how do we pay for things?
That's an excellent question. So the Drainage Fund is technically a component of the wastewater fund. So we pay for things in the fund component by essentially borrowing money from the wastewater fund. It is an unofficial borrowing of money. We perform it as a year-end journal entry transaction as a temporary loan. And it is something, this is one of the primary potential options for if there is any general fund surplus. Staff would be strongly suggesting any of that surplus would go to the Drainage Fund. We have allocated general fund surpluses in previous years to the Drainage Fund. We have also allocated some one-time revenue received from litigation costs into this fund as well. So anytime there are available revenues, we generally suggest that they go to support this fund.
So if it gets, say again where it gets funded through the
wastewater fund.
Wastewater fund, okay. But if we don't actually show the entry like here, we're not, where we do all these other transfers, we're not doing that transfer for this. What's the thought behind that? Why not?
Why are we not officially transferring from the wastewater fund to the Drainage Fund?
Mm-hmm.
Technically, that's a great question. I think we have historically been able to manage the deficit in the long term without locking up, to say, I guess is one way to say it, that wastewater revenue that is intended to support wastewater operations. They are technically the same fund, so it is not, it is fully an allowable use of funds. It is just not considered in the long-term financial planning of the rate studies. So it would potentially derail the wastewater fund. And for context, the Drainage Fund has gotten up to almost $1 million, and we've been able to reduce that in the current year. I think we are getting them all the way down to $69,000 negative, and that's down from $1 million. So we have managed to maintain this over time.
I'll just add to that. This is a fund that we have in the past per these contributions have and will continue to bail out. It just structurally doesn't work. We have that charge of $7.50. And the process for changing that is such that, it would use some of our political capital in a way that maybe someday we'll probably have to deal with this, but maybe isn't the first thing we wanted to, to your question earlier about when we're talking to the voters about revenue, perhaps this isn't the best bang for the buck in terms of when we're out there asking for help. But as long as it's structurally unsound as a fund, it means that periodically we need to put money in. Right. It just happens with some of the services we provide is they don't generate enough revenue to cover what they cost. That's true of a lot of things we do. And so you need to use available funds like Measure T coming into this fund. And because of that need, we just periodically, and as you heard, it was actually a lot worse a few years ago. So we've been chipping away at it, but not because the fund is becoming structurally sound. It still isn't. We just bail it out periodically because it's ultimately worth it to keep working on storm drain projects. So it's something that one of these days is we try to kind of pick off a few of these things in every budget. But inevitably, every budget, you probably leave one or two things to work on in the next budget, and this is probably on that list.
And it's not a significant amount, so yeah, okay, thank you.
I'm just curious if this is one of those that we are kind of kicking down the road. Instead of a 25-cent increase, we'd be looking at a substantial increase in the future.
It's more complicated than that. So the drainage fee was established prior to, I don't remember what California legislation it was, but we are currently grandfathered in at this fee, and we cannot increase it without going to the voters and establishing current approval. And that process would require an entire rate study and then a vote of the constituents.
So it's not going to be a teeny increase when we have to do it. It's going to be a little bit more substantial because we'll have to do the campaign, literature, all of that. So that is looming out there at some point.
Absolutely. And if we were to endeavor in that process, we would not only want the drainage fund to start recovering its own operating costs, those capital costs that are currently being funded by Measure T would also be a component. And there are a lot of deferred drainage capital costs. We are just chipping away at the iceberg on those.
All right, just a warning point. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else? No? Okay, move on.
Moving on to the electric fund. Total revenues in the electric fund are proposed at $20.5 million in both fiscal year 26-27 and fiscal year 27-28. The utility rate revenue in fiscal year 26-27 is reflective of Resolution 72-2023 adopted by Council in June of 23, which included scheduled rate increases, with the final 7% increase taking effect November 2026. Projected utility rate revenue for fiscal year 27-28 does not include any assumed rate increase. Demand in the electric fund increased by approximately 9% year over year in fiscal year 24-25. And through the third quarter of the current fiscal year, usage is trending to decline by only 3%, indicating that demand in the electric fund is likely to remain elevated, unlike the trends experienced in the water fund. This aligns with expectations that ongoing electrification efforts will continue to increase electric demand and reflects the new developments that have been electrified since completion of the 2023 rate study. The proposed budget also does not include any additional appropriations for revenue associated with the sale of renewable energy credits. However, I would like to note that to date, the city has received approximately $3.2 million in revenue from these REC sale credits. Proposed expenses in the electric fund total $18.4 million in the first year and increased to $19.3 million in the second. The chart before you has been updated from the posted agenda packet to correct the electric power purchase budget, which was inadvertently included in the operational expense line item in the original packet. Despite ongoing uncertainty in global energy markets, the Northern California Power Agency, also called NCPA, projections for power procurement costs have stabilized. Projected power procurement costs total $9.2 million in 26-27 and increased modestly to $9.4 million in 27-28. These costs are estimated to account for approximately 50% of the proposed electric fund budget. The electric fund is anticipated to fully fund both the operating reserve target of 50% and the capital reserve target of $4 million through the biennial budget period. At the end of fiscal year 27-28, the estimated remaining working capital after funding both reserves is projected at $11.8 million. It is important to note that on April 6, 2026, Council rejected all bids for the Grove Street undergrounding project due to timing constraints associated with a concurrent grant-funded streets project and uncertainty regarding cost participation from investor-owned utilities. As a result, the fund balance reflects the release of the $1.9 million previously allocated to that project, as well as the $3.2 million in revenue received from the sale of renewable energy credits. Staff continue to explore options for deploying the direct sale credits, including a potential battery storage project. However, no appropriations for those efforts are included in the proposed budget. Finally, while the capital projects proposed in the current biennial budget reflect modest expenditures in the proposed 5-year capital improvement plan, the long-term capital needs continue to exceed available funding. Due to the continued need for long-term capital financing, the proposed budget includes funding for a cost of service study in fiscal year 27-28. This approach would provide a 1-year reprieve for ratepayers as no rate increase is proposed in fiscal year 27-28. Council's prudent financial decisions to discontinue the Grove Street undergrounding project at this time and authorize the sale of renewable energy credits has created an opportunity to provide a temporary break in ongoing rate increases. However, it is important not to delay the financial planning process for an extended period, as postponing rate adjustments can create compounding impacts that ultimately require larger increases to restore long-term financial stability. The Badger Substation Bank Replacement Project has been a key driver of the long-term financial plan since fiscal year 22-23, as the substation transformers are approaching the end of their service life. Due to the scale and complexity of the project, the cost estimates remain uncertain. However, current projections total nearly $16 million. The proposed budget includes funding for the design phase, but additional revenues will be necessary to support future construction costs. The Electric Public Benefit Fund reflects the 2% public benefit fee applied to all electric utility bills. Revenues are projected to increase consistent with the adopted electric utility rates in the first year and total approximately $600,000 per year. The revenues are restricted to promoting energy efficiency, conservation, investment in renewable energy resources, and services provided to low-income electric customers. Total expenses are proposed at $600,000 in fiscal year 26-27, decreasing to $500,000 in 27-28. The Electric Cap and Trade Fund reflects revenues received from the Cap and Trade program, as well as the sale of low-carbon fuel standard credits. The low-carbon fuel standard credits are restricted to support transportation electrification, predominantly for the benefit of low-income individuals, while the cap and trade revenues are more broadly restricted for programs that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and support climate goals. Proposed revenues total approximately $900,000 in each fiscal year, and proposed expenditures in fiscal year 26-27 total $1.9 million, decreasing to $1 million in fiscal year 27-28. Both the Electric Public Benefit Fund and Electric Cap and Trade Fund have accumulated significant fund balance over time. The city continues to develop new conservation programs and encourage participation in existing programs. However, the proposed budget does not anticipate fully spending down either of these funding sources at this time. The Electric Public Benefit Fund includes electric fund contributions toward the planned utility billing enhancements, as well as ongoing funding for the low-income utility bill assistance programs for electric customers. Ongoing funding for low-income conservation and energy rebates is also included. The Cap and Trade Fund includes $833,000 proposed in fiscal year 26-27 to install additional public vehicle charging stations using the one-time allocation of low-carbon fuel standards received in the current fiscal year. Ongoing funding for conservation and energy rebates for utility customers without income restrictions are also included in the Cap and Trade Fund. The proposed 5-year capital improvement program for the electric fund totals $21.7 million. The program includes 4 new projects proposed to be funded in the biennial budget cycle, totaling $3.4 million. As previously highlighted, the next critical project to be funded will be the construction of the Badger Substation Bank Replacement Project. Funding for the proposed capital improvement program is largely supported by electric rate revenues. However, the proposed budget also includes the full deployment of the one-time revenue from the low-carbon fuel standards credits. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have regarding the electric funds.
Okay. Do you have any questions on this one? Okay, we can move on. Thank you.
Rounding out the presentation with a high-level overview of the major initiatives completed in the internal service funds. There are a total of 11 vehicles proposed to be replaced in the biennial budget cycle. For context, the city maintains over 121 vehicles, trailers, and tractors. The fleet team uses a detailed condition rating system that accounts for multiple factors, which are translated into projected service life estimates and used to establish replacement priority. Total replacement costs are $1.2 million in fiscal year 26-27 and under $500,000 in fiscal year 27-28. Back in fiscal year 22-23, to achieve the financial goal of right-sizing the internal service funds, the city transitioned from a pay-as-you-go model to a long-term replacement strategy. Instead of budgeting funds to support vehicle replacements on an annual basis, which previously resulted in inconsistent cost pressures and deferred replacements due to variable funding availability. Vehicle replacement fees are now based on the annualized cost of replacing future vehicles, as this approach provides greater consistency in service fees and flexibility in replacement timing. However, it is important to note, as discussed in the general fund conversation earlier this evening, that planned vehicle replacement fees for general fund departments were reduced to help address anticipated deficits. Ultimately, the total vehicle replacement fund balance is estimated at $3 million at the end of the biennial budget cycle. I do want to note that this slide has been updated from the initial packet to correct the fiscal year 27-28 allocation of the total fund balance among departments. The building maintenance fund includes a total of 9 new projects proposed in the biennial budget cycle, totaling $1 million in fiscal year 26-27 and $420,000 in fiscal year 27-28. These projects are critical in the ongoing completion of facility maintenance and improvements. The 2 largest projects are a result of the recent facilities condition assessments completed at the police and fire stations. The final fund for the evening is the Information Services Fund. Proposed expenses in the Information Services Fund total $3.6 million in fiscal year 26-27 and $3.7 million in fiscal year 27-28. There are several citywide initiatives included in this proposed budget. The first major new expense is related to the network and data center refresh lease council approved in June 2025. The service agreement spans 7 years and includes hardware, software, updates, monitoring, and support services for the city's network systems. The GIS redevelopment project is proposed to continue with additional funding allocations, and additional cybersecurity enhancements are also proposed. Finally, in the second year, staff are proposing to upgrade the city servers. I'm happy to answer any questions you have regarding the internal service funds.
Okay. Any questions? No. Oh, I guess we have no questions here. So.
Overall, the proposed budget includes funding that sustains current operations and continues important investments in city infrastructure. However, in the general fund, expense growth is outpacing revenue growth, and Measure T is increasingly supporting ongoing operations, leaving fewer resources available for capital projects. In the enterprise funds, the proposed budgets remain dependent on continued financial planning and periodic rate reviews. Ultimately, the city will need to remain strategic in evaluating new initiatives and continue closely monitoring financial performance throughout the budget cycle. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to collect any additional feedback at this time.
Well, thank you. Do you have any questions to wrap up the presentation? No. Thank you very much. You did a great job of moving through that quickly and clearly, as you usually do, but that was a big chunk, and really appreciate all the effort that you and your staff put into that. And it really makes our job easier to have everything sorted through and presented so cleanly to us. So thank you very much for that. Do you have any other comments for Director Elliott?
I'd just like to second that and say thank you to you and your staff I know you've worked on this a lot for a long time, and there's so many details that you have that gives us the ability to not ask a lot of questions on some of the things, and I think that's really important. So thank you.
Okay. So as promised, I would like to open up for a final public comment. If anybody would like to make comment on the budget. No. Okay. With that then, we can adjourn the meeting at 9:03.